People expect to see tears at a funeral. They expect quiet voices, flowers, memories, a final goodbye. They do not expect the person everyone came to bury to walk through the front door. On a gray Tuesday afternoon, nearly 200 people gathered inside St. Andrew's Church in the small Oregon town of Blackridge. They came to honor Margaret Collins. For 22 years, she had served as principal of Blackridge High School. She knew generations of students by name. She remembered birthdays. She attended graduations long after her own students had become parents themselves. People trusted her. 3 days earlier, deputies had pulled her SUV from the bottom of the Clearwater River after a fisherman spotted part of the roof beneath the surface. Her purse was inside. Her driver's license was inside. Her wedding ring was still on her hand. The medical examiner ruled the death consistent with drowning after the vehicle left the roadway during a heavy rainstorm. Everyone believed the case was over. The pastor had nearly finished his final prayer when the rear doors of the church slowly opened. At first, nobody looked. Late arrivals happened. Then someone gasped. A woman stood just inside the entrance. She wore a faded blue coat soaked from the rain. Her hair was tangled by the wind. She looked exhausted, confused, cold. She scanned the room until her eyes settled on the framed photograph beside the casket. It was her own face. Conversation stopped. The choir fell silent. One by one, every person in the church turned toward the stranger. Several people immediately recognized her. Someone whispered her name. Another person backed away in disbelief. Margaret Collins didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply stared at the polished casket resting beneath a blanket of white lilies. Then, in a trembling voice barely louder than a whisper, she said, "I think someone made a terrible mistake." Within minutes, deputies sealed the church. Nobody was allowed to leave. The casket remained closed. Outside, reporters began arriving before investigators even knew what they were investigating. Security cameras inside the church confirmed what every witness claimed. The woman who had entered the sanctuary looked exactly like Margaret Collins. The same face, the same voice, the same scar above her left eyebrow from a playground accident more than 30 years earlier. If Margaret Collins was alive, then whose body had been pulled from the river? And why had someone gone to extraordinary lengths to convince an entire town that she was dead? The church remained silent long after Margaret Collins spoke. No one knew whether to comfort her or back away from her. Deputy Aaron Mills stepped into the center aisle and raised both hands. "Nobody leaves the building." His voice was calm, but firm. "This is now an active investigation." The pastor slowly closed the Bible in front of him. The funeral director quietly stepped away from the casket. Margaret stood exactly where she was. She looked more confused than frightened. It was as if she expected someone else to explain what she was seeing. Her younger sister, Rachel, finally found the strength to move. She walked down the aisle with tears streaming down her face. She stopped only a few feet away. "I identified you." Margaret blinked. "What?" "I identified your body." Margaret shook her head. "No." Rachel's voice cracked. "They said it was you." Margaret looked toward the casket. "I've never seen that casket before today." Within minutes, patrol cars surrounded the church. The parking lot became a crime scene. Everyone who had attended the funeral was asked to remain inside until detectives arrived. 40 minutes later, Detective Emma Hayes walked through the front doors. She didn't begin with Margaret. She looked at the casket, the flowers, the photograph, the funeral register. Then she slowly studied the faces inside the sanctuary. Shock looked genuine. No one appeared prepared for what had happened. That mattered. People could fake grief. It was much harder to fake surprise. Deputy Mills met her near the front. I don't even know how to explain this. Emma nodded. Start with facts. The deceased arrived during her own funeral. Emma gave him a patient look. No. He corrected himself. A woman identified by multiple witnesses as Margaret Collins arrived during the funeral service. Better? She accepted the incident folder. The recovered SUV. The recovery photographs. The original medical examiner's report. Identification by next of kin. Accidental drowning. Case closed. Everything looked ordinary. Too ordinary. Emma turned toward Margaret. I'm Detective Emma Hayes. Margaret nodded weakly. I know how this sounds. Right now I'm not interested in how it sounds. Emma pulled a chair beside her instead of sitting across from her. I'm interested in what happened. Margaret took a slow breath. I left Portland 3 nights ago after a school conference. What time? A little after 7. Were you driving alone? Yes. What do you remember next? Margaret frowned. I stopped for gas. Weird. I don't remember the town. What happened after that? I remember headlights behind me. They stayed behind me for miles. Did you recognize the vehicle? No. Were they following you? I thought maybe they were. What happened next? Margaret closed her eyes. I honestly don't know. Emma waited. Silence often helped more than another question. The next thing I remember. Margaret swallowed. I woke up in a small cabin. Emma wrote nothing for several seconds. No windows. 1. Covered. The door. It wasn't locked. You could leave. I did. Why not sooner? I don't know how long I'd been unconscious. You don't remember anyone. Nope. New voices. No faces. No names. I walked until I found a road. A truck driver picked me up. Let me use his phone. I searched my own name. Her eyes drifted toward the casket. I found my obituary. Emma believed one thing immediately. Margaret believed every word she had just said. Whether her memories were complete was another question. Dr. Laura Bennett arrived shortly afterward. She looked uneasy. I need to examine the body again. The casket was carefully moved into a private room. Emma, Ben Torres, who had just arrived from another case, Dr. Bennett, and the funeral director were the only people allowed inside. The seal was photographed. The lid was opened. The woman inside resembled Margaret only in broad features. Similar age, similar height, brown hair. But she wasn't Margaret Collins. Ben looked toward Emma. So who is she? No one answered. Dr. Bennett leaned closer. She gently moved a lock of hair away from the woman's neck. Her expression changed. That wasn't there. Emma stepped closer. What? A bruising. Deep bruising beneath the jawline. Dr. Bennett examined it carefully. I need another autopsy. The first report listed accidental drowning. It shouldn't have. Emma looked directly at her. What are you seeing? The medical examiner took a slow breath. I'm seeing signs that this woman may have been strangled before she ever entered the river. The room fell silent. Outside, reporters continued gathering. Inside, the investigation had just changed. This was no longer a tragic accident. Someone had staged a death. Later that evening, Emma and Ben reviewed photographs of Margaret's recovered SUV. Ben stopped on one image. The driver's seat, and Emma looked closer. It was positioned unusually far forward. She opened Margaret's driver's license. Height, 5 feet 11. Emma measured the seat position against the vehicle specifications. Someone Margaret's height could not have comfortably driven with the seat adjusted that close to the steering wheel. The person driving wasn't Margaret, Ben said quietly. Emma nodded. And if Margaret wasn't driving, she enlarged another photograph taken by a traffic camera just minutes before the SUV reached the bridge. The image was grainy. The driver couldn't be identified. But one detail stood out. There was someone in the passenger seat. Emma stared at the screen. The original investigation had assumed Margaret was alone. The traffic camera proved otherwise. Whoever sat beside the driver was now the last known person to see the unknown woman alive, and no one had ever mentioned there had been a passenger. The sheriff's office was still lit long after midnight. Coffee had replaced dinner. Every conference room was occupied. Phones rang without pause. Outside, television crews waited behind barricades, hoping someone would walk outside and answer the question no one could. Who had been buried in Margaret Collins' place? Inside, Detective Emma Hayes pinned a fresh sheet of paper to the investigation board. Across the top she wrote only 4 words. WHOWASTHEV. Everything else depended on answering that question. Ben Torres walked in carrying a stack of reports. The second autopsy is finished. Emma looked up. What do we have? Ben handed her the report. Cause of death has officially changed. Emma, read silently. Manual strangulation. Death estimated several hours before the vehicle entered the river. No significant water in the lungs. No defensive wounds on the hands. Possible chemical sedation prior to death. She closed the folder. So the river wasn't the murder scene. Ben nodded. It was a disposal site. Emma stared at the board. Someone wanted investigators to stop asking questions. And they almost did. Margaret sat alone in a quiet interview room. She had been offered a hotel. She refused. She had been offered a counselor. She politely declined. She asked for only one thing. A notebook. Emma found her writing when she entered. What are you working on? Margaret looked embarrassed. I'm trying to remember. She turned the notebook around. Every page contained fragments. A gas station. Rain. Headlights. A song on the radio. The smell of gasoline. A pickup truck. A barking dog. Nothing connected. I thought maybe if I wrote everything down. Emma nodded. Memory doesn't always come back in order. Margaret sighed. I keep feeling like there's something important. There probably is. Emma pulled out another chair. Tell me about the conference. It ended around 6. Who did you leave with? No one. Did anyone know you were driving home that night? My staff. My sister. A few friends. Anyone else? Margaret hesitated. The school board knew I was traveling. Emma wrote it down. Did anyone seem unusually interested in your schedule? Margaret thought for nearly a minute. No. Then she frowned. Actually, Emma waited. There was a man. At the hotel? He asked whether I was driving back that evening. Did you know him? No? What did he look like? Margaret closed her eyes. I can't remember his face, but I remember his voice. It was calm. He smiled a lot. Emma made another note. Not much, but it was something. Digital forensics analyst Daniel Mercer entered carrying a small evidence box. The SESM card gave us more than I expected. And Emma motioned him toward the conference table. What survived? Call history. Text logs. Some location data. He connected his laptop. Margaret's phone appeared on the screen. The strange part starts here. He highlighted the timeline. Margaret disappeared just after 8:43 Sunday night. Emma nodded. Daniel clicked another entry. Her phone connected to a cell tower Monday morning. Where? Downtown Blackridge. Ben frowned. That's impossible. Daniel nodded. It gets stranger? Another click. Monday afternoon the phone connected again. Wednesday morning. And Thursday. Emma looked toward him. So someone had her phone. Exactly. And they kept using it. Daniel opened another window. There are no outgoing calls. No messages. So why turn it on? Emma answered before he could. To make it appear normal. Daniel nodded. Or to retrieve information. Ben returned from the financial crimes unit carrying another file. You'll want this? Emma opened it. Margaret's debit card. 2 transactions. Monday morning. A grocery store. $32.18. Monday afternoon, a self-service gas station, $48.70. Margaret looked up from across the room. I didn't buy those. Emma believed her. The timestamps matched the phone activity. Whoever had Margaret's phone also had her wallet. But that raised another question. If the killer wanted everyone to believe Margaret was dead, why continue using her bank card afterward? That wasn't careful. It was reckless. Unless it wasn't the killer using it. By sunrise, investigators had identified every customer inside the grocery store. The surveillance footage was already downloading. Emma and Ben drove there before opening. The manager unlocked the office. I heard about the funeral. So did everyone else. Emma smiled politely. We need Monday's video. Within minutes, the footage appeared on the monitor. The timestamp matched the transaction. A woman approached the checkout. Baseball cap. Large sunglasses. Gray hoodie. She kept her head down. Ben leaned closer. Can you zoom? The picture became grainy. The woman paid using Margaret's debit card. The cashier handed back the receipt. The woman left. Emma paused the video. Print this frame. The manager did. Ben looked at the image. Could be anyone. Emma wasn't looking at the face. She was looking at the hands. The left hand. Ben squinted. What about it? No wedding ring? Margaret always wore one. Rachel had confirmed it. Every school photograph showed it. If the woman on camera was pretending to be Margaret, she had overlooked one small habit. She wasn't wearing the ring. The gas station footage was worse. Only one security camera worked. The customer never looked toward it. But something else stood out. The vehicle. A dark blue pickup truck. The same truck that appeared briefly beside Margaret's SUV on traffic footage taken just outside Portland. Ben replayed the clip. Same model. Emma nodded. Maybe. Same damage on the rear bumper. Now Ben saw it. A dent just above the license plate, not proof, but enough to justify searching traffic cameras along the route. Late that afternoon, Dr. Bennett called. I have something. Emma and Ben drove straight to the morgue. The medical examiner placed a small envelope on the table. We finished fingerprint processing. And no match. Ben frowned. No criminal history. Dr. Bennett shook her head. No driver's license. No employment records. No immigration file. No military records. No passport. Emma looked confused. Nothing? Nothing? Are you saying she doesn't exist? I'm saying she doesn't exist in any database we have access to. Silence settled over the room. An unidentified homicide victim in modern America was rare. A woman with absolutely no identifiable record at all. That was almost unheard of. Dr. Bennett opened a second envelope. We also recovered traces of adhesive. Weir. Behind both ears. Emma leaned forward. What kind of adhesive? The kind commonly used to attach prosthetic pieces. The Ben looked puzzled. A disguise? Possibly. Emma's thoughts raced. If someone had altered the victim's appearance, then resemblance to Margaret might never have been natural. It might have been manufactured. As they prepared to leave, Emma's phone rang. It was Daniel Mercer. His voice was unusually tense. I think you'd better come back. What happened? I recovered one deleted voicemail from Margaret's phone. Emma stopped walking. Can you play it? I already did. There was a pause. Emma. It wasn't left for Margaret. What do you mean? The caller says. Daniel took a slow breath. If you're hearing this, then she never made it to the river. Emma reached the digital forensics unit in less than 10 minutes. Daniel Mercer already had the audio queued. I isolated the background noise, he said. The message itself is only 14 seconds. Emma nodded. Play it. A man's voice filled the room, calm, controlled. If you're hearing this, then she never made it to the river. Burn everything. Don't call me again. The message ended with a click. Silence settled over the room. Ben looked at Daniel. Are we sure this was on Margaret's phone? Daniel nodded. It was deleted, but not overwritten. Emma replayed it twice. Then a third time. She wasn't listening to the words anymore. She was listening to everything around them. A faint hum, a metallic rattle, a long horn in the distance. What did you isolate? Daniel clicked another file. The background. The horn sounded again, then a rhythmic clanking. Ben frowned. A train. Daniel nodded. Freight train, most likely. Emma asked, can we locate it? Not directly. But the phone that left the message connected to one tower. He brought up a map. The tower covers an industrial district south of Blackridge. Rail Yard, Emma said quietly. Exactly. An hour later, Emma and Ben stood outside the sprawling freight terminal. Hundreds of shipping containers stretched across the property. Engines idled. Steel wheels screeched against rails. The same sound echoed through the voicemail. Emma wasn't expecting to find the caller. She was hoping to narrow the timeline. A supervisor met them in the security office. We'll keep camera footage for 30 days. Good, Emma said. We're looking for activity Sunday night into Monday morning. The supervisor began searching. Hours of footage rolled by. Forklifts, freight crews, semi-trucks. Nothing. Then Ben leaned closer. Stop. A dark blue pickup entered through the south gate. Timestamp. Monday. 6:12 a.m. Emma felt her pulse quicken. The rear bumper carried a shallow dent above the license plate. The same dent seen at the gas station. The same dent seen beside Margaret's SUV. Can you enhance the plate? The supervisor tried. The image sharpened slightly. Still unreadable. Emma wasn't disappointed. She had something better. The truck belonged somewhere. And somewhere meant records. Back at the morgue, Dr. Laura Bennett was waiting. I've finished the tissue analysis. Emma removed her jacket. What did you find? Laura held up several photographs. These were taken under magnification. Tiny traces of flesh, colored silicone clung to strands of the victim's hair. There was definitely prosthetic material. Emma studied the images. Facial alterations? Likely. Enough to resemble Margaret. Laura hesitated. Not perfectly, but in poor lighting, with water damage, and emotional identification. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The body had never needed to be an exact match. It only needed to be close enough for grieving people to believe what they expected to see. Emma returned to Margaret. Do you recognize this man? She slid a still frame across the table. The image came from the rail yard. Only the outline of the pickup's driver was visible. Margaret shook her head. No. Emma wasn't surprised. What about this? She showed another photograph. A still taken from the grocery store. The disguised woman. Margaret stared for nearly a minute. I've never seen her. You don't recognize the jacket? No. The way she stands. Margaret slowly pushed the photograph back. I wish I did. She looked exhausted. I keep thinking if I just remember one thing. Emma closed the folder. Memory isn't something you can force. Margaret sighed. I know. But every hour I can't remember. Someone gets farther away. Just after lunch, dispatch called. They had located the truck driver who reported picking up Margaret. His name was Caleb Ross. He owned a small landscaping business. Caleb met the detectives at his equipment yard. I've been wondering if someone would come. Emma switched on her recorder. Tell us exactly what happened. It was Tuesday morning. Emma looked up. Tuesday? I'm sure. I was hauling mulch north on County Road 12. I saw a woman walking along the shoulder. Muddy. Cold. Looked like she'd been out all night. What time? A little after 8. Emma exchanged a glance with Ben. Tuesday morning. Not Wednesday. Not Thursday. Tuesday. That meant Margaret had reappeared nearly a full day earlier than she'd believed. What happened after you picked her up? I offered breakfast. She wouldn't eat. I gave her coffee. She kept asking what day it was. Emma wrote that down. Did she say where she'd been? No. Did she mention anyone? No. Caleb reached into his wallet. I almost forgot. He removed a folded receipt. She used the back of this to write something. Emma carefully unfolded it. 3 words. Don't tiras. The rest had been torn away. Ben looked at Caleb. Was it already torn? I don't know. I found it on the seat after I dropped her off. Emma turned the paper over. Nothing else. 3 unfinished words. Don't trust. Who? Back at headquarters, Daniel called again. I identified the prepaid phone. Emma smiled. Already? Sort of. It was purchased with cash. Figures. But I know where. He pulled up another receipt. A convenience store. When? 2 days before Margaret disappeared. Emma nodded. Security footage. I'm requesting it now. Before she could answer, Ben walked into her office carrying another file. You'll want to see this. He laid a property map across the desk. The industrial tower that handled the voicemail. Emma looked closer. The coverage area wasn't large, the rail yard. A warehouse district. An abandoned paper mill. And one isolated property tucked against the river. Ben tapped it. County records show it's been vacant for 11 years. Emma looked at the aerial photograph. A weathered cabin stood alone beneath towering pines. Margaret had remembered waking inside a cabin. 1 window. Covered, near a logging road. Emma looked back at the map. The description matched almost perfectly. Sheriff Grady stepped into the office. You thinking what I'm thinking? Emma nodded. If we're right. She folded the map. The place where Margaret woke up may still be exactly the way her kidnapper left it. The search warrant was signed less than an hour later. At sunrise. They would finally have somewhere to start looking. The convoy reached the abandoned property just after sunrise. Fog drifted between towering pines. The cabin stood alone at the end of an overgrown logging road. Its paint had long since faded. Several broken shingles lay scattered across the roof. From a distance it looked forgotten. Up close, it looked recently disturbed. Emma stepped from her SUV and studied the ground before walking any farther. Nobody crosses the yard until Lisa photographs it. The crime scene technician Lisa Grant nodded and began placing evidence markers. Ben looked toward the cabin. The grass is flattened. Emma followed his gaze. Someone had driven here recently. The tracks were still visible in the damp soil. Lisa crouched beside them. Pickup truck. You sure? She smiled. Not yet. She measured the tread. But I'd bet my next paycheck. But Emma walked slowly toward the porch. The front door hung slightly open. It moved gently with the morning breeze. Not enough to make noise. Just enough to suggest someone hadn't cared whether it stayed closed. Sheriff Grady approached. Ready? Emma nodded. Let's clear it. Ben pushed the door open. The cabin smelled of damp wood. Dust floated through thin beams of morning light. The kitchen was barely furnished. An old table. 2 mismatched chairs. A rusted wood stove. Nothing looked valuable. Everything looked temporary. Emma moved carefully from room to room. The bedroom contained only a metal bed frame, a thin mattress, a blanket folded with unusual precision. She stopped. Ben. He walked over. What? The blanket? What about it? Someone made the round. In an abandoned cabin. And Emma nodded. People hiding something often keep the things they control perfectly organized. Lisa entered carried an evidence light. There are fibers. She pointed toward the mattress. Dark blue wool. Emma removed an evidence photograph from her folder. Margaret's raincoat. The colors appeared nearly identical. Bag everything. Lisa carefully collected the fibers. The bathroom revealed little. A cracked mirror. A rusted sink. An empty medicine cabinet. But the kitchen told another story. Lisa lifted a ceramic coffee mug from the counter. There are dried residues inside. Emma looked closer. Send it. If we're lucky? Ah. Lisa nodded. We'll know exactly what was in it. Ben opened a lower cabinet. Nothing. Another. Empty. The third drawer stuck halfway open. He pulled harder. Something caught underneath. A folded piece of paper. Emma unfolded it carefully. The page had been torn from a ledger. Columns of handwritten numbers filled one side. Dates, dollar amounts. Initials. The top of the page was missing. So was the bottom. Ben frowned. Financial records. Looks like it. Emma slipped it into an evidence sleeve. It wasn't left here by accident. Outside, Lisa called for Emma. You need to see this. Behind the cabin, hidden beneath tall weeds, lay a narrow clearing. Fresh tire tracks circled the back of the property. Lisa pointed. These aren't the same tracks that came in. Emma crouched. Meaning, one vehicle arrived. Another left later. She measured the impressions. The second set is newer. Much newer. Ben looked toward the woods. How new? Lisa studied the edges. They haven't softened. Maybe yesterday. Emma slowly stood. Someone came back. After Margaret escaped. Silence settled over the clearing. If the kidnapper had returned, what had they been looking for? By early afternoon, the search was complete. No fingerprints. No usable DNA. The cabin had been wiped down thoroughly. Professional. Deliberate. Emma remained behind while the others packed equipment. She wasn't ready to leave. Something still bothered her. She walked around the side of the cabin. A faint sound stopped her. A tiny cry. Barely audible. She looked toward a pile of fallen branches. The sound came again. Soft. Weak. She knelt and gently moved several pieces of broken timber aside. Two frightened eyes stared back at her. A tiny ginger kitten. Its fur was dirty. One front paw trembled. It couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old. Emma looked around. No mother. No littermates. Nothing. The kitten tried to stand. It managed 2 unsteady steps before collapsing onto the leaves. Ben rounded the corner. What have you got? Emma smiled for the first time all day. I think. She reached down carefully. I've got company. The kitten didn't hiss. It didn't run. It simply leaned against her gloved hand. Ben chuckled. Looks like it picked you. Emma gently lifted the tiny animal into her jacket. We'll take it to a vet. Maybe somebody nearby lost it. Ben looked around the abandoned property. I doubt anyone's been living out here, except whoever used this cabin. Emma scratched behind the kitten's ears. Its tiny purr surprised her. You hungry? The kitten answered with another weak meow. On the drive back, the kitten slept inside a folded evidence blanket that had never been used. Ben glanced over from the passenger seat. You know. What? Nobody claims it out. Emma kept her eyes on the road. I'm not keeping a cat. Ben smiled. I didn't say you were. You were thinking it. I've worked with you long enough. Emma laughed quietly. It needs a veterinarian. Food? A safe place? That's all. Ben looked out the window. Temporary. Exactly. Neither of them believed that. The veterinarian examined the kitten that afternoon. Male, she said. A little underweight. No microchip. No serious injuries. Just hungry and exhausted. Emma let out a quiet breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. So he'll be okay? He will. The veterinarian smiled. If someone doesn't come looking for him in the next few days, he'll need a home. Emma looked down at the tiny orange kitten now sleeping against her sleeve. He had trusted her almost immediately. She wasn't sure why. Or why that mattered as much as it did. She signed the temporary care paperwork. As she reached the parking lot, her phone rang. It was Daniel Mercer. His voice was urgent. We identified one of the numbers from the ledger page. Emma opened the driver's door. Who does it belong to? Daniel hesitated. It isn't a bank account. What is it? It's a property tax parcel number. Emma froze. We're Daniel answered quietly. The Collins family. The land has been in Margaret's family for almost 50 years. Emma slowly looked back toward the veterinary clinic. Somehow, the abandoned cabin, the murdered woman, and Margaret Collins' own family had just become part of the same investigation. Emma slept for barely 4 hours. The case was beginning to settle into the rhythm she knew well. Every answer created 2 new questions. By 7 the next morning, she was already back in the office. The small cardboard pet carrier sat beside her desk. Inside, the ginger kitten was awake. He blinked at her through the wire door and let out a tiny meow. Emma smiled despite herself. Breakfast first. Ben walked in carrying 2 coffees. He stopped when he noticed the carrier. I thought he was staying at the clinic. They asked if I could foster him for a few days. Ben grinned. So that's what we're calling it. Emma gave him a look. It's temporary. Of course. Ben leaned closer to the carrier. The kitten reached one paw through the opening. I think he's already made his decision. Emma ignored the comment. We have work to do. Daniel Mercer was waiting in the conference room. A county map covered one wall. Several parcels had been highlighted in yellow. The property tax number from the ledger wasn't for the cabin itself. Emma looked closer. It wasn't. Daniel shook his head. It belongs to a larger tract. He pointed toward a shaded area stretching nearly 3 miles along the river. This entire section used to belong to the Collins family. Margaret frowned. I've never seen this before. Daniel handed her copies of old deeds. Your grandfather purchased the land in 1968. Margaret looked genuinely surprised. I knew he owned a farm. I didn't know it was this large. Daniel nodded. Most of it was sold years ago. But not all of it. He tapped one small square. The cabin sits right here. Ben looked at Emma. So someone was holding Margaret on property connected to her own family. Emma folded her arms. Or someone wanted us to think that. The county records office occupied the basement of the old courthouse. Rows of steel shelves held thousands of aging documents. County Clerk Susan Hale met the detectives. I've already pulled everything connected to the Collins parcels. Emma noticed an empty space on the cart. Everything? Susan hesitated. Actually all. There was one file I couldn't locate. When did it disappear? I'm not sure. I realized it was missing yesterday. And Emma looked at Ben. Which file? The trust documents. What trust? Suzanne opened an index book. A land trust created by Samuel Collins in 1984. The folder should be here. It isn't. Emma asked quietly, has anyone requested those records recently? Susan checked her computer. Yes? When? Last Friday. Emma's eyes narrowed. Who requested them? Susan turned the monitor around. The request had been submitted online. No name, only an email address. A temporary encrypted account that had already been deleted. Someone had been looking into the Collins family land. 2 days before Margaret disappeared. Margaret sat alone with the old deeds. She turned each page carefully. I don't understand. Emma pulled up another chair. What? My grandfather always talked about the farm. He never mentioned a trust. Did your parents? No. What about your Uncle Harold? Margaret paused. He handled Grandpa's estate. When your grandfather died? Yes. Emma wrote down the name. How often do you see him? Thanksgiving, Christmas, maybe once or twice in between. Do you trust him? Margaret answered immediately. Yes. Then she looked back at the documents. I think I do. Emma noticed the hesitation. Sometimes uncertainty lasted only a second. Sometimes that second changed an entire case. Harold Collins lived 30 miles outside Blackridge. He welcomed the detectives without complaint. I'm guessing this isn't a social visit. Emma smiled politely. It rarely is. Harold invited them inside. Family photographs lined the walls. Margaret appeared in many of them. Graduations, birthdays, fishing trips. Everything looked ordinary. Emma asked about the land trust. Harold frowned. I remember something about it. What exactly? It was created for tax purposes. Who managed it? I honestly don't remember. Ben watched him carefully. You handled your father's estate. I handled most of it, not the legal paperwork. Who did? Our attorney, still practicing. Harold shook his head. He passed away years ago. Emma studied him. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't nervous, but every answer stopped just short of being useful. As they prepared to leave, Emma noticed something sitting on a bookshelf. An old framed aerial photograph. The Collins property. She stepped closer. The cabin was visible in one corner, but something else caught her eye. There was another building, a much larger one. She pointed. What's that? Harold looked surprised. Oh, the old bookkeeping office. What happened to it? It burned down. When? About 25 years ago. Emma nodded. Were any records lost? Harold smiled sadly. Almost all of them. Back at headquarters, Daniel called again. I've got something from the ledger page. And Emma switched the call to speaker. The dollar amounts aren't payments. What are they? They match quarterly transfers. Transfers to whom? I don't know yet. But every amount corresponds with one account. Emma leaned forward. What account? A trust account that officially closed in 2002. Ben frowned. So why were recent figures written on a page from that ledger? That's exactly the problem. Daniel's voice became quieter. The trust may have closed, but someone has been keeping it alive off the books. Emma finally arrived home after dark. The small house was quiet. Too quiet. She placed the pet carrier on the kitchen floor. The kitten cautiously stepped outside. He sniffed one chair, then another. Finally, he wandered into the living room and climbed onto the couch as though he had lived there forever. Emma laughed. You settle in fast. The kitten answered with a soft purr. She poured food into a small bowl the veterinarian had packed. He attacked it with remarkable enthusiasm. Emma sat at the dining table reviewing photographs from the cabin. The kitten finished eating. A moment later, he jumped onto the chair beside her, then onto the table, then directly onto the open case file. Emma sighed. You have perfect timing. The kitten curled into a ball on top of the paperwork. For the first time in nearly 48 hours. Emma stopped thinking about evidence. She gently scratched behind his ears. You need a name? The kitten looked up. Orange fur, bright eyes, fearless curiosity. Emma smiled. Dexter. The kitten answered with another tiny purr. I guess that settles it. Her phone rang. It was Ben. I hate to ruin the moment. Emma glanced at Dexter, already asleep on the file. What happened? The anonymous records request. We traced where it was submitted. Emma reached for her notebook. We're the public library. Security cameras caught the person. Can you identify them? Ben didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, Emma. The person searching the Collins family trust records was someone who attended Margaret Collins' funeral. Emma barely slept. Dexter had claimed one corner of the couch. Every few hours he wandered into the hallway, made sure Emma was still home, and curled back into his blanket. It was the first peaceful sound Emma had heard in days. By sunrise, she was back at the sheriff's office. Ben was already waiting. He slid a still photograph across the conference table. This came from the library. Emma picked it up. A man stood at a public computer terminal. Mid-50s. Dark sport coat, reading glasses. His face was perfectly visible. She looked up. I know him. So do I. Owen Price, the elected treasurer of the Blackridge School Board. Margaret's boss. Emma studied the timestamp, Friday afternoon. 2 days before Margaret vanished. What exactly was he searching? Daniel answered from his laptop. Property trusts. historic parcel transfers, and specifically, he enlarged the search history. The Collins Family Preservation Trust. Emma folded her arms. He didn't stumble onto it. No. He knew exactly what he was looking for. Owen Price agreed to come in voluntarily. He arrived carrying a leather briefcase and an expression that suggested he believed the meeting would be brief. Emma switched on the recorder. Mr. Price, why were you researching the Collins Family Trust? I was curious. About what? I enjoy local history. Ben raised an eyebrow. You spend Friday afternoons reading property records as a hobby. Owen forced a smile. I've always been interested in land ownership. Emma slid the surveillance photograph toward him. You searched one trust. Only one. Silence. Owen looked at the picture, but never touched it. Emma noticed. People instinctively moved evidence closer when they intended to explain it away. Owen kept both hands folded in his lap. You knew Margaret Collins. Professionally. How well? We worked together for years. Were you aware she would be driving home Sunday evening? Everyone at the conference knew. Did you speak with her before she left? Knew. Emma opened another folder. Your phone records show a 4-minute call with Margaret at 6:28 that evening. Owen blinked, then sighed. I forgot about that. What did you discuss? Budget numbers. Nothing important. Emma wrote one sentence. 6 first confirmed lie, so not because he called. Because he said he hadn't. After Owen left, Ben leaned against the doorway. What do you think? He lied too quickly. You think he's involved. Emma shook her head. I think he's hiding something. That's different. She looked back at the interview room. Guilty people usually prepare lies. Innocent people often forget details. Owen did neither? He panicked. Daniel walked into the conference room carrying a sealed evidence envelope. The library director found this. Inside were dozens of shredded paper fragments. The library empties secure recycling every Friday. These were missed. Emma looked confused. Can they be reconstructed? Daniel smiled. I already started. By afternoon, the pieces formed half of a financial statement. Several account numbers were missing, but one heading remained intact. A Hezeras Rivergate Holdings, LLC. Theros. Ben frowned. I've never heard of it. Daniel typed quickly. That's because it officially dissolved 16 years ago. Emma looked at the reconstructed page. So, why was someone printing financial records connected to a company that doesn't exist anymore? No one had an answer. Margaret spent the afternoon walking through her own house with investigators. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing appeared disturbed, yet everything felt wrong. She stopped in front of a bookshelf. My photo albums. Emma looked over. They're organized differently. Rachel frowned. How can you tell? I always sorted them by school year. Margaret pulled one album free. This one's backwards. Inside, nothing was missing, but tucked between 2 pages was a receipt. A hardware store. Dated Monday. The day everyone believed Margaret was dead. Purchased with cash. One item, industrial strength adhesive. Emma looked at Dr. Bennett's report. The same type of adhesive used to attach prosthetic pieces. Someone had been inside Margaret's house, and they had hidden the receipt where only Margaret was likely to find it. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. Late that evening, Daniel called again. I found something else. Emma answered immediately. What is it? I audited the sheriff's network. And someone accessed your case file. Emma stopped writing. Woo, I don't know yet. They used valid credentials. When? 3 times. Last night, Ben looked up. Could it have been one of us? Daniel shook his head. The login belongs to a retired deputy. Emma frowned. Has been retired for 6 years. Exactly. So either someone stole his credentials, or someone inside the department knows how to make it look that way. Silence settled over the room. For the first time since the investigation began, the possibility of an insider could no longer be ignored. Emma finally returned home close to 10. Dexter was waiting just inside the front door. The tiny kitten trotted toward her with surprising confidence. She smiled. "You've decided this is your house." Dexter answered by rubbing against her ankle. Emma filled his food bowl before sitting down with the reconstructed financial statement. One detail suddenly caught her attention. The address listed for Rivergate Holdings. She recognized the road immediately. It wasn't downtown. It wasn't an office building. It was less than 2 miles from the abandoned cabin. She reached for her phone. Before she could dial Ben, another envelope slid through her mail slot. Emma froze. She hadn't heard a car. She opened the front door. The street was empty. Only the envelope remained. No stamp. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Emma earlier that afternoon, standing outside Margaret Collins' house. Someone had been watching her. Scrawled across the bottom in black marker were 5 words. "As you're asking the wrong family. X." Emma didn't touch the photograph for several seconds. She studied it where it lay on her kitchen table. The angle. The distance. The lighting. Whoever took it had been patient. It wasn't snapped from a passing car. Someone had watched her. Waited for the right moment. Then quietly slipped the envelope through her mail slot. Dexter jumped onto the chair beside her and sniffed the edge of the photograph. Emma gently moved it away. "Not this one, buddy." The kitten looked at her, then curled into a tight orange ball beside her notebook. Emma smiled faintly. It was the first time she'd called him buddy. She picked up her phone. "Ben, I just received a message." His voice sharpened immediately. "What kind of message?" "Someone photographed me outside Margaret's house." A pause. "I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, Ben stood inside Emma's living room. He examined the envelope under a flashlight. No prints. Emma wasn't surprised. No saliva on the seal either. "There isn't one." Ben nodded. They hand-delivered it. He looked toward the front window. "You didn't hear anyone?" "No." They knew exactly how long they'd have. Ben bagged the photograph. "The paper's expensive." Emma looked up. "What?" "This isn't printer paper." He turned it over. "Professional photographic stock. Not something you'd usually buy for home use." Emma made a note. Small details mattered. Sometimes they mattered more than fingerprints. The next morning, Daniel Mercer was waiting with another discovery. "I dug deeper into Rivergate Holdings." Emma sat down. "I thought the company dissolved." It did. Officially, Daniel tapped a series of business filings. Unofficially, he brought up another corporation, Stone Ridge Agricultural Services. Then another, North Valley Resource Group. Then another, Cedar Basin Management. They're all connected. How? The same mailing address. The same registered agent. The same accounting firm. Ben frowned. "So Rivergate changed names?" Daniel nodded. 3 times. And every company quietly inherited the previous one's assets. Emma leaned back. Someone kept the business alive without attracting attention. Daniel zoomed in on a financial summary. Guess what one of those assets was? Emma already suspected. The Collins property. Daniel nodded. It never really left the trust. It was simply moved through a chain of companies. And Emma and Ben drove to the county hospital. Doctor Laura Bennett had called before sunrise. "I found something during the postmortem review." She opened a medical photograph. The unknown victim's abdomen showed a narrow surgical scar. It healed years ago. Emma looked closer. "Can you identify it?" "I believe it came from an emergency appendectomy." "Can we trace it?" "If records still exist." Within an hour, they were sitting in the hospital archives. Most files had been digitized. Older records had not. Boxes filled an entire storage room. An archivist disappeared for nearly 40 minutes. When she returned, she carried a single folder. I think this is the one. The surgery had taken place 23 years earlier. The patient's name had been partially damaged by water. Only the first name remained legible. Sarah. The surname had blurred beyond recognition. Ben sighed. So close. Emma wasn't looking at the name. She was looking at the emergency contact. One line remained perfectly readable. Ask Guardian Evelyn Brooks. Sake, she underlined it. Find Evelyn Brooks. Back at headquarters, Daniel called from the lab. I've got preliminary DNA. Emma answered immediately. Tell me? The unknown woman isn't in any database. We knew that. But, Daniel hesitated. There was a partial familial match. Emma stood. To who? A woman who submitted DNA to a genealogy service years ago. Ben looked over. Can we identify her? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. He took a breath. Her name is Linda Brooks. Emma froze. The same family name. Exactly? Relation. The software estimate's first cousin. Silence filled the room. The victim finally had a family. Even if they didn't know she was dead. Emma decided to tell Margaret only what she could verify. We may have identified a biological relative. Margaret nodded. That's good. It means she has a name somewhere. Emma watched her carefully. Margaret looked genuinely relieved. She hadn't known the victim. At least not consciously. What happens now? Emma answered honestly. We'll find her family. And we find out why she died wearing your identity. Margaret looked down. I keep thinking. Emma waited. If I'd remembered more, this might already be over. Emma shook her head. Knew. The person who planned this counted on confusion. They wanted you doubting yourself. Don't help them. Margaret gave a faint smile. I'll try. That evening Emma returned home earlier than usual. Dexter met her at the door. His confidence had grown noticeably in just 2 days. He chased a crumpled receipt across the living room, slid across the hardwood floor, then proudly carried it back to Emma. She laughed. You're getting brave. She picked him up. For a moment, the weight of the case lifted. Only for a moment. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. I found Evelyn Brooks. She's been dead for 11 years, docs. Another message arrived before Emma could answer. Vas Respa, she had 2 daughters, Soxicris. Emma opened the attachment. A family tree appeared on the screen. She scanned the names, then stopped. One of the daughters had married decades earlier. Her married name was Collins. Emma's heart sank. The unknown woman wasn't just connected to Margaret's family. She had been connected to it all along. Emma arrived at headquarters before sunrise. The family tree still occupied the center of the investigation board. Red strings connected names. Blue notes marked confirmed facts. Yellow notes marked assumptions. Emma removed 2 yellow notes. They had just become facts. Sarah Brooks. Margaret Collins. First cousins. She stared at the board for a long moment. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to disguise Sarah as Margaret. That wasn't random. That was personal. Daniel walked in carrying another folder. We've confirmed the DNA. Emma looked up. No doubt. He shook his head. No doubt. The victim is Sarah Brooks. Ben leaned over the report. Do we know where she's been living? Daniel sighed. That's where things get strange. He opened another file. There are almost no records after she turned 19. No employment history. No marriage license. No property. No tax filings. Nothing. Almost nothing. Daniel slid one faded document across the table. A driver's license renewal. Expired 12 years earlier. The address was a rural mailbox nearly 60 miles from Blackridge. Emma circled it. We're going. The mailbox stood beside an empty gravel road. No house. No barn. Nothing but open pasture and abandoned fence posts. Ben checked the GPS. This is the address. Emma climbed out. A weathered farmer working nearby watched them approach. You looking for someone? Sarah Brooks. The old man removed his cap. Haven't heard that name in years. You knew her. I knew of her. When did you last see her? He thought for a moment. Maybe 15 years ago. She lived out here. No. She came looking for somebody. Woo. The Collins family. Emma exchanged a glance with Ben. What happened? The farmer shrugged. Didn't stay long. She seemed disappointed. Why? She told me somebody kept telling her she belonged somewhere else. Back in town, Emma and Ben met with Carol Jensen, Sarah's older cousin. Carol had agreed to speak after learning investigators had identified the victim. She sat quietly, twisting a tissue between her fingers. I always wondered if she'd come back. Emma asked gently, when did you last see Sarah? Almost 13 years ago. What happened? Whit argued. About what? Our family. Carol looked toward the window. Sarah became obsessed with our genealogy. She kept saying people were lying to her. Lying how? She believed someone had changed birth records. Emma leaned forward. Did she have any evidence? Carol nodded slowly. Boxes. What kind of boxes? Old papers. Letters. Photographs. She said she'd found them in her mother's attic. Emma felt her pulse quicken. Where are they now? Carol's expression fell. They disappeared. When? The same week Sarah vanished. That afternoon Daniel made another discovery. I searched every adoption record involving the Brooks family. Emma walked into his office. Find anything? One file. He opened a scanned document. Most of it appeared ordinary. Then he enlarged the final page. 3 sheets had been removed. Not copied. Not misplaced. Removed. Can we recover them? Daniel shook his head. The archive was digitized after the pages disappeared. Emma rubbed her forehead. So somebody physically altered the file. Years ago. Ben folded his arms. Meaning whoever planned Margaret's disappearance has been cleaning up records for a very long time. Emma spent the afternoon inside the County Historical Society. Dust covered nearly every shelf. A volunteer librarian helped retrieve newspapers from microfilm. Emma searched 1 year, then another. Finally, she stopped. A headline filled the screen. Azure Historic Collins Accounting Office destroyed in overnight fire date. 31 years earlier. She printed the article. The story described an electrical fire that destroyed financial ledgers, trust records, and business correspondence. No injuries. No criminal investigation. Case closed within 48 hours. Emma frowned. Too easy. She kept reading. One sentence near the bottom caught her attention. Among the records believed destroyed were documents relating to the Collins Family Preservation Trust, the same trust that now sat at the center of her investigation. Emma returned home well after dark. Dexter was waiting at the front window. The tiny ginger kitten had grown noticeably more confident. As soon as Emma unlocked the door, he darted toward her carrying a toy mouse nearly as large as he was. She laughed. I see you've been busy. Dexter proudly dropped the toy at her feet. Emma picked him up. He immediately climbed onto her shoulder. You've decided this is permanent, haven't you? He answered with a loud purr. Emma smiled. I suppose that makes 2 of us. She carried him into the kitchen and prepared his dinner. While he ate, she spread copies of the old newspaper across the table. Something still bothered her. She reread the fire investigation. Then the insurance report. Then the witness statement. One line stopped her cold. The first firefighter on scene reported smelling gasoline before entering the building. Emma reached for the official fire report. Cause of fire. Electrical malfunction. She compared the 2 documents again. They directly contradicted each other. Before she could process it, her phone rang. It was Ben. You need to get down here. What happened? We found another death connected to the Collins Trust. Emma grabbed her keys. How old? Ben's voice was unusually quiet. 31 years. Emma froze. The same year as the fire. Wes. It was ruled an accidental drowning. Silence filled the kitchen. Emma looked down at Dexter, who had wandered over and curled against her ankle. Then she looked back at the newspaper. One staged drowning, one suspicious, one hidden trust, and now a second drowning that had happened 3 decades before Margaret Collins was ever reported dead. Emma had the unmistakable feeling that she wasn't investigating one murder anymore. She was investigating the first visible crack in a secret that had been buried for a generation. Emma reached the sheriff's office before dawn. The conference room had changed overnight. The board that once centered on Margaret Collins now stretched across an entire wall. Photographs, maps, financial records, family trees, 2 homicide victims, 1 kidnapping, a staged drowning, and now, a death from 31 years earlier. Ben placed an aging case file on the table. The victim's name was Thomas Brooks. Emma looked up. Sarah Brooks' father. Ben nodded. He drowned in the Clearwater River. The official finding was accidental. She opened the folder. The photographs had faded with age. A pickup truck resting nose, down in shallow water. Volunteer firefighters. Deputies standing along the riverbank. The scene looked painfully familiar, almost identical to Margaret's SUV. Emma turned another page. What was Thomas doing for work? Ben answered before she finished reading. He was an accountant. Emma stopped. An accountant? He specialized in agricultural trusts. Silence filled the room. She looked slowly toward the investigation board. This isn't coincidence. No. Ben agreed. It isn't. Daniel entered carrying a banker's box. I found Thomas Brooks' tax records. Emma motioned him inside. Anything useful. Hay reported consulting income. For who? Daniel unfolded several pages. Revergate Holdings. Emma stared at him. The same company. The original company. Ben let out a slow breath. So Thomas worked for them. Daniel nodded. For almost 5 years. Emma leaned back. And then he drowned. Margaret sat quietly across the room reading another stack of family records. I never knew any of this. Emma believed her. Most families only remembered the stories they were told, not the ones deliberately erased. Margaret looked toward Emma. My mother used to mention Thomas. Only once or twice. What did she say? That he asked too many questions. Emma looked up immediately. Those were her exact words. Margaret nodded. I remember because she laughed after she said it. But her expression darkened. She never explained what he was asking. That by mid-morning Emma and Ben drove to the home of Martha Doyle. Retired fire investigator. 81 years old. She answered the door carrying a mug of coffee. I've been expecting someone eventually. Emma smiled politely. You remember the Collins accounting office fire? Martha laughed softly. I remember every fire that bothered me. And did that one bother you? It still does. She disappeared briefly and returned carrying an old notebook. I kept personal notes. The department didn't like that. Emma opened it carefully. Every page was handwritten. Neat. Precise. One entry had been underlined twice. Strong gasoline odor before suppression began. Casefiles looked toward Martha. The official report says electrical failure. I know. Huh? You disagreed. I did. What happened? Martha looked out the window. My supervisor changed the report. Emma remained silent. Did he explain why? No. Hay only said. She closed her eyes for a moment. Some fires are better left alone. Back at headquarters, Daniel was smiling for the first time in days. I think I found Thomas' missing ledger. Emma hurried into his office. I thought it disappeared. So, did everyone else? He pointed to an estate inventory. It wasn't listed as a ledger. What was it listed as? Farm expense journal? Ben frowned. Where is it now? Daniel clicked another record. According to probate documents, it was never collected. Emma looked puzzled, meaning it should still be in storage. The storage facility occupied an old county warehouse. Dust coated nearly everything inside. Rows of forgotten evidence and estate property stretched into darkness. A clerk unlocked a narrow cage. If it's here, he pointed towards several wooden crates. It'll be in one of these. Nearly an hour passed before Ben lifted a weathered leather notebook. The cover read only 2 words: Farm Journal. Emma opened it. The first 20 pages contained ordinary expense records. Seed, feed, fuel. Then the handwriting changed. Dates disappeared. Numbers became larger. Company names appeared. Revergate Holdings, Collins Family Preservation Trust, North Valley Resource Group. And in the margin beside one entry, Thomas had written 6 words. S money moved before every death. Boxer Emma looked at Ben. He knew. Ben nodded slowly. He knew enough to scare someone. Late that afternoon, Daniel called everyone into the lab. I digitized the remaining photographs from Thomas' belongings. Most showed family gatherings, fishing trips, birthdays, nothing unusual. Then one photograph appeared, taken outside the Collins farmhouse in 1995. Children played in the yard. Adults stood near the porch. Margaret looked no older than 14. Daniel enlarged the background. Near the road, partially hidden behind a pickup truck, a man stood watching the family. Not smiling, not speaking. Just watching. Emma leaned closer. Can you sharpen it? Daniel enhanced the image as much as the software allowed. The face remained indistinct, but one feature became unmistakable. The man wore a distinctive silver belt buckle engraved with the outline of an eagle. Ben frowned. I've seen that before. Emma looked at him. Weir. He hurried to the evidence board and retrieved the grocery store surveillance still from earlier in the investigation. The disguised woman purchasing groceries with Margaret's debit card had been accompanied by someone waiting outside. Only part of the person's waist had been visible. Emma laid the 2 photographs side by side. Same oversized silver eagle buckle, 31 years apart. Neither photograph could positively identify the man, but both appeared to show the same distinctive piece of clothing. If it was the same person, then someone had been quietly watching the Collins family for more than 3 decades. Emma gathered the photographs without saying a word. Because for the first time since the case began, she wasn't asking who killed Sarah Brooks. She was asking how many lives had already been destroyed before anyone finally noticed the pattern. Monday morning began with rain. A steady drizzle covered Blackridge in gray. Emma watched it through her office window while studying Thomas Brooks' ledger for what felt like the 100th time. The numbers no longer looked random. Every unusually large transfer appeared within weeks of a tragedy, a fire, a drowning, a property sale, a death certificate. Someone had turned human suffering into accounting entries. Ben stepped in the office carrying fresh coffee. You've been here since 5. Emma accepted the cup. So has whoever built this. She tapped the ledger. This isn't bookkeeping. It's a timeline. Ben looked closer. You think Thomas realized that? I think that's why he's dead. Daniel Mercer entered carrying another folder. I found the trust account. Emma immediately looked up. I thought it was closed. So did the bank. He placed several certified records on the table. It officially closed in 2002. He slid another page forward. But the account number never disappeared. What happened? It became an internal holding account. Ben frowned. Meaning? The public couldn't see it. The bank still could. Emma studied the deposits. There weren't many. One every year or 2. Always different amounts. Always from different businesses, but they all ended in the same place, the Collins Family Preservation Trust. It stayed alive, Emma said quietly, for 30 1 year. Daniel nodded, and someone worked very hard to hide it. Emma and Ben drove to the offices of attorney William Keene. The building overlooked the town square. Keene greeted them politely. I had a feeling this visit was coming. Emma switched on her recorder. You inherited the Collins Trust. I inherited the practice. The trust came with it. When? 21 years ago. Did you ever manage its assets? Only administrative matters. Emma placed the ledger on his desk. Recognize these entries. Keene adjusted his glasses. His expression changed almost immediately. I haven't seen this handwriting in years. You know whose it is. Thomas Brooks. Silence. Ben leaned forward. How do you know? He came to see my former partner. What about? The trust. Emma kept her eyes on him. Did he believe something was wrong? Keene hesitated. He believed money was disappearing. And was it? I never proved it. Did your partner? I don't know. Emma noticed his fingers tighten around the edge of his chair. He wasn't comfortable, not frightened. Careful. Very careful. As they prepared to leave, Emma asked one final question. Has anyone from the Collins family visited you recently? Keene answered almost too quickly. No. Emma simply thanked him. She and Ben walked out without another word. Halfway to the parking lot, Ben looked at her. He lied. Emma nodded. I know. How? He answered before I finished asking. Back at headquarters, Daniel was already waiting. I checked the building's security system. Emma smiled slightly. I was hoping you would. He displayed footage from Keene's office. 3 days before Margaret disappeared, a visitor entered through the side entrance. The camera showed only the person's back at first. Then they turned. Rachel Collins, Margaret's younger sister. Neither detective spoke. Emma replayed the footage. Rachel stayed inside for nearly 40 minutes. She had never mentioned the meeting. Emma asked Rachel to come in that afternoon. Rachel looked exhausted. She sat down without speaking. Emma placed the still image on the table. You visited William Keene. Rachel stared at it. Then quietly nodded. Yes. Why didn't you tell us? I wasn't hiding it. You never asked. Emma let the silence settle. What was the meeting about? Rachel looked toward the window. Our parents. Emma waited. They always believed there was money missing from Grandpa's estate. Did you? I didn't know what to believe. So I asked Keene if the trust still existed. What did he tell you? Rachel laughed bitterly. He said there was nothing left. Emma slid Daniel's banking records across the table. He wasn't telling the truth. Rachel's face drained of color. No, she whispered. I knew something wasn't right. Late that evening, Lisa Grant entered the evidence lab carrying a sealed bag. We recovered this from the cabin fireplace. Inside were several burned scraps of paper. Most were unreadable. One fragment had survived. Daniel carefully enhanced it on the screen. Only 2 initials remained. Vesubis. Ben frowned. Evelyn Brooks. Maybe? Emma replied. Or someone else entirely. Below the initials, a single line of typed text remained legible. Says, beneficiary amendment. Emma stared at the words. Someone had tried to destroy a document changing who would inherit something valuable. The question was, who had been removed? Emma finally returned home just after 9. Dexter was waiting on the windowsill. The moment she unlocked the door, he bounded across the living room and climbed into her arms. She smiled. You've made this your evening routine. The little ginger kitten purred loudly. Emma carried him into the kitchen while reviewing the day's notes. For a few quiet minutes, the case faded into the background. Then her phone vibrated. It was Daniel. His voice was unusually tense. I reran the security footage from Keene's office. Emma set Dexter gently onto the counter. What did you find? There was someone else. Woo. The camera outside caught another visitor leaving through the rear exit exactly 6 minutes before Rachel arrived. Can you identify them? Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he said, I don't know who he is, but he's wearing the same silver eagle belt buckle we've seen in photographs spanning 31 years. Emma looked toward the rain falling outside her kitchen window. The unknown watcher hadn't disappeared. He was still alive, and he was still one step ahead. Emma arrived at the office carrying a paper cup of coffee and a folder she hadn't stopped thinking about all night. The Silver Eagle belt buckle. It had appeared in a photograph taken 31 years earlier. Then again outside the grocery store. Then outside William Keene's office. 3 sightings. 3 decades. Either 3 different men had worn the same distinctive buckle, or one man had remained remarkably careful about staying in the background. Ben entered, carrying the cardboard evidence box. I've got something. Emma looked up. The buckle. Ben nodded. I sent the image to the State Historical Museum. They recognized it. Daniel looked over from his workstation. Already. Ben smiled. It wasn't commercially sold. He opened a folder. The buckle was commissioned by the Cascade Ranch Association. Emma frowned. How many were made? 14. Silence settled over the room. 14. Not hundreds, not thousands. Just 14. Emma immediately wrote every name onto the investigation board. Several were already deceased. Some had moved out of state. One had disappeared from public records entirely. His name was Raymond Ellis. Officially, he died in a logging accident 22 years earlier. If you're enjoying this investigation, don't forget to subscribe to Midnight Casefiles and leave a like. It helps the channel continue bringing you original mysteries like this one, and it lets you know the moment the next investigation is released. Daniel searched Raymond Ellis records. Death certificate is legitimate. Autopsy. Performed. Buried. According to the file. Emma folded her arms. According to the file. Ben smiled slightly. You don't believe it. I've stopped believing paperwork. Daniel kept digging. Then paused. Interesting. What? Raymond Ellis, social security number stopped being used. That's normal. But he opened another window. His driver's license wasn't canceled for almost 3 years. Emma looked up. Administrative delay. Daniel shook his head. It was renewed. The room became quiet. Ben leaned closer. After he died, Daniel nodded once. Someone renewed it. Emma drove to the county records office. Nancy Ellis, the library director, was already waiting. I remembered something after your last visit. She handed Emma a yellowed membership booklet. The Ranch Association held annual dinners. The Emma flipped through the pages. Every member had a photograph. When she reached Raymond Ellis' page, she stopped. The image was old, grainy, young. But one feature stood out immediately. A pronounced bend in the bridge of his nose. The same unusual profile visible in the enhanced surveillance, still outside Keene's office. Not proof, but close enough to demand more questions. Ben spent the afternoon following another lead. Raymond Ellis had once rented a storage locker. The business still existed. The owner searched old records. We almost cleaned it out years ago. Why didn't you? The rent kept getting paid. Ben looked surprised. For 22 years. The owner nodded. Automatic payments. Emma stared at the contract. The signature looked different after the first year. Different handwriting. Different pressure. Someone else had quietly taken over the account. Can we open? Nodded. With owner nodded. With a warrant. By late afternoon they stood inside the storage facility. Rows of metal doors stretched into the distance. Unit 214 sat near the back. Lisa photographed the lock. Ben cut it. The door rolled upward with a metallic groan. Inside. No furniture, no clothing, no personal keepsakes. Just filing cabinets. Dozens of them. Emma slowly opened the nearest drawer. Tax returns, property maps, birth certificates, marriage licenses, death certificates, everything meticulously labeled. Ben opened another cabinet. This isn't one person's records. No. Emma agreed quietly. It's hundreds. Daniel joined them a few minutes later. He examined several folders. They're copies, not originals. Emma looked around the room. Someone had spent years collecting identities. Some belonged to dead people. Some belonged to living people. Several names matched people already connected to the Collins investigation. Margaret Collins, Thomas Brooks, Sarah Brooks, Samuel Collins, Rachel Collins. Every file contained copies of signatures, driver's licenses, insurance forms, property records. The room wasn't a trophy collection. It was an archive. Someone had been preserving lives on paper. Back at headquarters, Daniel digitized the contents. One folder immediately stood out. It belonged to a woman named Helen Morris. Officially, she had died in Arizona 21 years earlier. Daniel frowned. That's impossible. Emma walked over. What? She voted last year. Ben looked up sharply. What? Daniel rotated the monitor. State voting records. Current driver's license. Property tax payments. Someone was still legally living as Helen Morris. 21 years after her reported death, Emma felt the pieces shifting beneath her. This isn't just financial fraud. Ben nodded slowly. It's identity replacement. And Emma finished the thought. Someone isn't stealing identities. They're maintaining them. That evening, Emma returned home later than she intended. Dexter greeted her halfway down the hallway, racing across the hardwood floor with far more confidence than the frightened kitten she'd rescued only days before. He pounced on her shoelace. Missed. Rolled onto his back. Then immediately tried again. Emma laughed softly. You don't give up, do you? Dexter climbed into her lap as she settled onto the couch with the day's reports. He batted at the corner of a photograph until it slid onto the floor. Emma reached down to pick it up. She froze. It wasn't the photograph that caught her attention. It was what had been underneath it. A folded receipt she'd brought home from the evidence review earlier that week. She unfolded it again. The hardware store purchase. Industrial adhesive. This time she noticed something she'd overlooked. The cashier number. Register 3. She immediately called Ben. Can we identify which employee worked Register 3? We already did. Why? Because I just got the schedule. Emma waited. The cashier working that register. He paused. Was Helen Morris? Emma looked down at the identity file Daniel had just uncovered. Officially, Helen Morris had died 21 years ago, yet someone using her identity had sold industrial adhesive. Just 2 days before Margaret Collins disappeared, Emma was already driving before sunrise. Ben met her outside the sheriff's office. Daniel had spent most of the night tracing the driver's license issued under the name Helen Morris. If she's using that identity, Daniel had said over the phone, she has to live somewhere. The address led them to a quiet subdivision on the edge of Salem. Small homes. Neatly trimmed lawns. Nothing unusual. The mailbox read only one name. Helen Morris. Emma knocked. A woman in her late 60s opened the door. She looked tired. Not surprised. She studied Emma's badge for several seconds. I wondered when this day would come. Emma glanced at Ben. You know why we're here? The woman nodded. I think so. May we come in? She stepped aside without another word. The house was modest. Bookshelves lined one wall. Family photographs covered another. Emma noticed something immediately. Every photograph began roughly 20 years earlier. Nothing older. No childhood pictures. No wedding portraits. No graduation photos. Almost as though the woman's life simply started. Emma sat across from her. Is your name Helen Morris? The woman looked down at her hands. No. Silence. My name is Grace Nolan. Ben quietly switched on the recorder. How long have you been using the name Helen Morris? Grace closed her eyes. 21 years. Emma asked gently, why? Grace answered almost immediately. Because someone paid me to disappear. Me either, detective spoke. Grace continued. My husband died. I was drowning in debt. A man approached me. He said he could give me a new start. What did he ask in return? I had to leave. Never contact anyone I knew. Never use my real name again. Emma leaned forward. Did you know Helen Morris? Grace shook her head. No. I was told she'd already died. Ben placed the hardware store receipt on the table. You purchased industrial adhesive. Grace looked at it. Yes! For who? I don't know his real name. What did he look like? He was older. Always wore boots. Large silver belt buckle. Emma and Ben exchanged a look. The same man again. Grace continued. He gave me a shopping list. I bought everything. He paid cash. What was the adhesive for? I never asked. Emma believed her. Grace didn't seem frightened. She seemed relieved. As though she had spent years waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Back at headquarters, Daniel had another update. I checked Margaret's school. Emma walked into the lab. What about it? You asked me to pull every available camera. Daniel rotated a monitor. School entrance. Faculty parking lot. Main road. Then another image. A utility pole across the street. Mounted high near the transformer. A tiny weatherproof camera. Emma frowned. That's not ours. No. Ooh. The school confirmed it. No permit. No maintenance records. Ben folded his arms. How long was it there? Daniel enlarged the installation report from the electric company. It first appeared about 6 weeks ago. Emma looked toward Margaret. You were being watched. Margaret stared at the screen. For 6 weeks. At least. Technicians removed the camera before noon. The memory card had been wiped. Professionally, but not completely. Daniel managed to recover fragments. Most files were corrupted. One survived. The timestamp placed it 12 days before Margaret disappeared. Students crossed the parking lot. Teachers loaded cars. Margaret walked toward her SUV. She unlocked the driver's door. Then, someone stepped into frame. Not close enough to speak. Not close enough to be noticed. Just close enough to watch. The image sharpened. The silver eagle belt buckle caught the afternoon sun. The man remained still until Margaret drove away. Then he calmly walked in the opposite direction. He wasn't following her. He was confirming her routine. Emma interviewed Margaret again that afternoon. Did anyone unusual ever come to the school? Margaret thought carefully. Parents. Former students. Vendors. Nothing that stood out. Emma showed her the recovered still frame. Margaret stared for nearly a minute. I've never seen him. You may have. You just didn't notice. Margaret looked unsettled. He watched me for weeks. Emma nodded. Which means your disappearance wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. Daniel spent the afternoon comparing names from the storage locker. Patterns slowly emerged. Every identity replacement shared 3 things: a financial crisis, an unexpected death, and a connection to one of 4 extended families in the county. The Collins family was only one of them. Emma looked at the growing chart. This operation is bigger than we thought. Ben nodded. It isn't just one inheritance. It isn't even one family. Emma quietly added another sheet to the board. Across the top she wrote thousand HOBE feats. Esque. Below it, nothing. Not yet. Emma arrived home after dark. Dexter met her at the door carrying the same toy mouse he'd proudly claimed as his own. He dropped it at her feet. Emma smiled. I know. I've been gone too long? She scooped him up. The kitten rested his head beneath her chin and purred until the tension in her shoulders finally eased. She carried him into the kitchen while reviewing the day's photographs. One image slipped from the stack. The surveillance still from the school. This time she noticed something she'd missed. Reflected in the side window of Margaret's SUV. Another person. Not the man with the silver buckle. Someone sitting inside a parked sedan across the street. Daniel enhanced the reflection before midnight. The face remained blurry. But one detail was unmistakable. The woman behind the wheel was wearing a Blackridge School District Employee Identification Badge. Someone inside Margaret's own workplace had been helping watch her. Emma barely slept. The image from the school parking lot replayed in her mind. A blurred reflection. A school employee badge. Someone close enough to Margaret to know her daily routine. Close enough to report it. By 7 that morning, Daniel had enhanced the footage as far as technology would allow. The face remained indistinct. The badge did not. A partial employee number was visible. 3 digits. 217. Ben returned from the school district office carrying a personnel file. Employee 217. Emma opened it. Valerie Owens. Administrative assistant. 12 years with the district. No criminal history. Excellent evaluations. Margaret looked over Emma's shoulder. I know Valerie. Emma looked up. What kind of person is she? Quiet? Reliable. She remembers everyone's birthday. Margaret frowned. I can't imagine her hurting anyone. Emma nodded. Neither can I did. That doesn't mean she wasn't used. Valerie agreed to come to the sheriff's office voluntarily. She appeared nervous before the interview even began. Emma offered her a bottle of water. We're trying to understand something. Valerie nodded. I'll help if I can. Emma placed the enhanced photograph on the table. Is this your car? Valerie looked down. Yes. Were you parked across from the school that afternoon? Yes. Why? She hesitated. I was told to be. The room fell silent. Ben leaned forward. Who told you? I don't know his name. Emma remained calm. Start from the beginning. Valerie took a deep breath. About 2 months ago, I received a phone call. He knew things about me. My mortgage. My medical bills. My son's tuition. He said someone wanted simple information. What kind of information? Nothing private. Just. She swallowed. What time Principal Collins arrived? What time she left? If she changed her routine? Emma asked quietly. And you agreed? Valerie nodded, ashamed. He said I'd receive $500 every Friday. I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone. Ben asked, how were you paid? Prepaid debit cards. No names. No return address. Daniel examined the cards later that morning. They were all purchased with cash. No surveillance. Very little. He enlarged one receipt. Purchased at different stores. Different counties. Always by someone wearing a baseball cap. Always paying cash. Professionally careful. Emma wasn't surprised anymore. Every answer seemed to uncover another layer. During a second interview, Valerie remembered something new. I kept notes. Emma looked up. What kind of notes? So I wouldn't forget. Valerie retrieved a small spiral notebook from her purse. Most pages contained ordinary reminders. Meeting times. Supply orders. Teacher absences. Then the writing changed. Every few days, she had recorded Margaret's schedule. Left school 4712. Faculty meeting. Parent conference. Home early. Emma flipped farther. Several entries immediately stood out. The exact day Sarah Brooks disappeared. The day Margaret vanished. The afternoon William Keene met Rachel Collins. Ben circled each date. They knew where everyone would be. Emma nodded. They weren't reacting. They were planning. Grace Nolan was Brock for another interview that afternoon. Emma placed Valerie's notebook beside the hardware store receipt. Grace studied both. Then pointed to one particular date. I remember this week. Emma leaned forward. Why? The man with the silver buckle canceled everything. What do you mean? He said. She paused, searching her memory. The timetable changed after the school confirmed her habits. Emma looked at Ben. Valerie hadn't realized it, but her routine reports had allowed someone to predict Margaret's movements with incredible precision. Lisa Grant entered the evidence lab carrying a sealed envelope. We recovered fingerprints from one of the filing cabinets in the storage locker. Daniel opened the report. Anything useful? Lisa nodded. One partial print belongs to Grace Nolan. The Grace wasn't surprised. I delivered documents there. Emma asked, who gave them to you? The same man. The silver buckle. Grace nodded. He never stayed long. Did anyone else use the locker? Grace closed her eyes. I only saw one other person. Ooh, a deputy. The room became still. Emma spoke carefully. Are you certain? I only saw the uniform. What did the deputy do? He unlocked the gate, then left. Emma immediately requested access logs for the evidence warehouse. Daniel compared them with departmental records. A pattern emerged. Every major search warrant in the Collins investigation, every evidence transfer, every interview request. Someone had accessed the internal case management system within minutes, sometimes within seconds. Ben stared at the screen. That's impossible. Daniel shook his head. Nope. It's internal. Emma leaned over the keyboard. How many people have that level of access? Daniel's answer was immediate. 23. Sheriff Tom Grady entered just as the room fell silent. He studied the monitor, then looked at Emma. You think we've got a leak? Emma met his eyes. I think we've had one from the beginning. That evening, Emma returned home later than usual. Dexter greeted her with the same determined sprint that had become his nightly ritual. This time he skidded across the hardwood floor, overshot her feet, and slid into the wall before popping back up, as though nothing had happened. Emma couldn't help laughing. You meant to do that. Dexter chirped in protest before chasing his toy mouse into the living room. For a few minutes, the house felt normal. Emma poured herself a cup of tea and opened the latest access log Daniel had emailed. She read each entry carefully. Interview request, evidence submission, search warrant, case file opened. Then one timestamp caught her attention. Someone had accessed the investigation file 43 minutes before the judge had officially signed the search warrant. Emma frowned. That wasn't merely a leak. It was impossible. No one should have known the warrant even existed. She immediately called Daniel. Run. One more comparison. What am I looking for? Everyone who viewed the case before the warrant was approved. Daniel was silent for nearly a minute. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Emma. What? There's only one account. Woo's. It belongs to someone who retired 6 years ago. Emma's grip tightened on the phone. The retired deputy's credentials, the same credentials used to access her case files weeks earlier, were still actively being used inside the sheriff's office. Emma was back in Daniel's office before sunrise. Neither of them had slept much. The retired deputy's account remained open on Daniel's monitor. Every unauthorized login, every search, every warrant, every evidence transfer. Years of activity. Daniel rubbed his eyes. I checked twice. Then I checked again. Emma folded her arms. The account was never disabled. Daniel nodded. When Frank Delaney retired, someone forgot to deactivate his credentials. Ben looked up from another workstation. Forgot? Daniel shook his head. I don't think anyone forgot. They were deliberately kept alive. Silence settled over the room. Emma looked at the login history. The account had been used hundreds of times. Not every week, not every month, only when something important happened. Whoever was using it understood exactly how much access they needed and exactly how little attention they wanted. Retired Deputy Frank Delaney agreed to meet them at his home. He was 73 now. His hearing wasn't what it used to be, but his memory remained sharp. Emma explained why they were there. Frank looked genuinely confused. I haven't touched a department computer since I retired. Emma believed him. Did you ever give anyone your password? No. Write it down. Frank thought for a moment. Only once. When? The week before I retired. Why? The IT technician said they needed it to transfer my files. Ben exchanged a glance with Emma. Do you remember the technician? Frank frowned. No. I don't. But. He looked toward an old photograph hanging in the hallway. I remember thinking I'd never seen him before. Daniel reviewed employment records. No temporary technician had been assigned that week. No contractor, no consultant, no visitor. Officially, the technician had never existed. By early afternoon, Daniel traced the latest login. For the first time, they had a camera. The login originated from a public library 2 towns away. The building still retained security footage. Emma and Ben drove there immediately. The librarian recognized the date. I remember him. She pulled up the recording. A man wearing a baseball cap sat alone at a public computer. He logged in, worked for less than 5 minutes, then stood. As he walked toward the exit, the camera captured his face. Not perfectly, but clearly enough. Late 50s, gray hair, trimmed beard, calm expression. Daniel immediately began facial recognition. Nothing. No driver's license, no passport, no criminal history. Ben stared at the screen. How does someone not exist? Emma answered quietly. Maybe he does. Just not under that name. Grace Nolan arrived a short time later. Emma showed her the photograph. Grace's face immediately lost color. That's him. The silver buckle. She nodded. I never knew his name. What did he call himself? Grace swallowed. Victor. Just Victor. Daniel searched every database he could access. Victor. Nothing useful. Alias after alias. No match. Then Lisa entered carrying another evidence box from the storage locker. Missed one compartment. Hidden beneath the bottom drawer. They found a notebook wrapped in plastic. The pages were handwritten. Most entries consisted of initials, dates, addresses, routine observations. The final pages were different. One heading appeared repeatedly. Has custodian reports. Emma frowned. Custodian? Ben turned another page. Each report ended with the same sentence. Eska's identity preserved. Exposure prevented. Has Daniel quietly said, I don't think this is one person anymore. Emma nodded. I don't either. That evening a patrol officer called. The abandoned storage building outside Mill Creek, the one listed in Victor's notebook, had lights on inside. Emma and Ben responded immediately. The building sat alone at the end of a dirt road. Rain had finally stopped. The air smelled damp, too quiet. Emma motioned for Ben to circle around back. She approached the front entrance. The old door stood slightly open. Inside, metal shelves, boxes, maps pinned to walls. Someone had been working there recently. Fresh coffee still sat on a table. A laptop was gone, but its charging cable remained plugged into the wall. Emma whispered into her radio. He's close. A floorboard creaked upstairs. She moved carefully toward the staircase. Halfway up, a figure appeared briefly at the end of the hallway. Gray hair, dark jacket, the silver eagle belt buckle. Police! The man looked directly at her, not frightened, almost disappointed. Then he disappeared. Emma ran. By the time she reached the hallway, a rear window stood open. Ben shouted from outside, He's running! Emma reached the yard just in time to see the man disappear into the trees. Then, a deafening explosion shattered the night. The storage building erupted behind them. Glass burst outward. Flames raced through the first floor with terrifying speed. Back? Ben grabbed Emma's arm as burning debris crashed onto the ground. Within seconds, the entire structure was engulfed. It wasn't an accident. Someone had rigged the building to destroy itself. Fire crews arrived within minutes, but Emma already knew most of the evidence was gone. Hours later, after firefighters declared part of the scene safe, Lisa carefully searched through the debris. Nearly everything had burned. Computers, files, photographs, gone. Then she called out, "I've got something." Emma hurried over. Wedged beneath a collapsed steel filing cabinet was a charred leather notebook. The edges had burned away, but the center survived. Emma carefully turned the first readable page. Typed neatly across the top was a title, Ix Custodian Field Manual. Several pages were unreadable. Then one paragraph remained almost completely intact. Tree A custodian protects identities, preserves bloodlines, and ensures designated inheritances reach their intended recipients. Exposure must be prevented by lawful means whenever possible. If lawful means fail, alternative measures are authorized. If Emma read the passage twice. Ben stared at the page. This isn't a criminal crew. Emma slowly closed the notebook. No. It's an organization. And judging by this manual, she looked toward the smoldering ruins of the building. It's been operating for a very long time. As firefighters continued pouring water onto the wreckage, Daniel called Emma's phone. His voice was urgent. "I finally identified Victor." Emma stopped walking. "Who is he?" Daniel took a slow breath. "I was searching the wrong databases." "What did you find?" "Victor isn't his first name. It's his middle name." Emma waited. Daniel continued. "His full name is..." Oh, a burst of static interrupted the call. Then silence. The connection was gone. Emma looked down at the phone. No signal. She turned back toward the burning building. Someone had escaped. Someone had erased another safe house. And somewhere in the darkness, someone whose identity they had almost uncovered was already disappearing again. The fire had burned through the night. By sunrise, all that remained of the storage building was twisted steel and blackened concrete. Emma stood beside the ruins while investigators sifted through the debris. Most of the evidence was gone. Not destroyed in panic. Destroyed with purpose. Ben walked over carrying a sealed evidence bag. They found one hard drive. Emma looked inside. The metal casing had melted. The internal storage hadn't survived. Another dead end. Or so it seemed. Her phone vibrated. "Daniel, I've got him." Emma didn't waste a second. "I'm on my way." Daniel had spent the entire night rebuilding the interrupted search. When Emma entered the lab, his monitor displayed a personnel record from nearly 3 decades earlier. At the top of the page was a photograph. Gray hair now. Dark hair then. But the face was unmistakable. Richard Victor Hale. Emma studied the file. Occupation. Daniel scrolled. State probate investigator. Ben frowned. What exactly does a probate investigator do? They investigate estates. Missing heirs. Identity disputes. Inheritance fraud. Emma looked at the screen for a long moment. So he spent years learning exactly how families, wills, and identities worked. Daniel nodded. And then he opened another document. He resigned without notice 27 years ago. No criminal investigation. No pension. No forwarding address. Simply disappeared. Sheriff Grady joined them a few minutes later. "I remember the name." Emma turned. "You knew him." "Not well." "He testified in a couple of estate hearings." "What was he like?" Grady thought for a moment. "Quiet. Very organized. The kind of man nobody remembered after he left the room." Emma couldn't think of a more dangerous description. Daniel had recovered one surviving page from the burned notebook using infrared imaging. Most of the ink had vanished. One section remained readable. US recruitment standards. Emma read aloud. Candidates experiencing severe debt, recent bereavement. Pending bankruptcy, no immediate family support. Ben looked up. They recruited desperate people. Grace Nolan quietly nodded. "That's exactly what happened to me." Emma continued reading. "In exchange for financial security." The candidate agrees to permanently surrender their legal identity. Silence filled the room. Grace spoke softly. I thought I was the only one. The realization spread through the room. Grace hadn't been kidnapped. She had been recruited. The custodians found people whose lives were falling apart. They offered escape, a clean slate, a new name, a new history. But there had to be a price. Emma turned another recovered page. There it was, a single sentence. Past former identities remain property of the organization. Ben stared at the words. Property? Emma nodded slowly. They never really let them go. Later that afternoon, Emma interviewed Margaret again. She placed several photographs on the table. One showed Richard Hale from 27 years earlier. Margaret studied it. Then her breathing changed. I've seen him. Emma immediately leaned forward. When? The school fundraiser. Last spring. Ben looked surprised. He approached you? No. He stood across the parking lot. I thought he was waiting for someone. Emma showed her another photograph. The surveillance image outside the school. Margaret closed her eyes. It was him. He'd already picked me. Back in the lab, Daniel made another breakthrough. I reconstructed part of Hale's calendar. Emma looked up. Can you place him before Margaret disappeared? Daniel nodded. For months. Appointments appeared across the screen. Library, county records, school district, bank, church, hardware store, every location connected to the investigation. Every visit looked ordinary on its own. Together, they formed a blueprint. He wasn't stalking Margaret, Emma said quietly. He was building her replacement. Daniel looked confused. Emma continued. He studied every place connected to her life. So when she was declared dead, someone else could eventually step into it. The room fell silent. Ben slowly looked at Margaret. You were never supposed to come back. Margaret felt the weight of those words. If I hadn't escaped. Emma finished the thought. The world would have accepted your death, and eventually, someone else would have inherited everything connected to your name. That evening, Daniel called everyone into the conference room. I found something hidden inside Hale's personnel file. He projected a scanned sheet onto the wall. 3 names. No explanation. Just names, each followed by a date. The first had been crossed out. Sarah Brooks, he Seth the second. Sess's Margaret Collins Doss, also crossed out. The third remained untouched. Emma felt her stomach tighten. The final name reads Rachel Collins. Sess, no one spoke. Rachel looked from the screen to Emma. What does crossed out mean? Emma answered honestly. I think it means the operation is complete. Rachel's voice trembled. And my name? Emma looked back at the document. It hasn't happened yet. Before anyone could respond, Daniel enlarged the bottom corner of the page. There was one final handwritten note. Small, almost overlooked. Activation scheduled Friday. Emma checked the calendar on the wall. Today was Wednesday. Whatever the custodians had planned for Rachel Collins, they intended to carry it out in less than 48 hours. The conference room became unusually quiet. No one looked away from the list. Sarah Brooks, Margaret Collins, Rachel Collins, 2 names crossed out. 1 waiting. Emma broke the silence. From this moment forward, Rachel doesn't go anywhere alone. Ben nodded. I'll organize 24-hour protection. Rachel looked uncomfortable. I don't need babysitters. Emma met her eyes. This isn't about taking away your freedom. It's about making sure you keep it. Rachel finally nodded. All right. Within an hour, deputies were assigned to Rachel's home. Her phone was monitored. Her vehicle was inspected. Daniel cloned the contents of her laptop in case anyone attempted remote access. Everything appeared ordinary. Almost too ordinary. Emma had learned to distrust quiet days. Grace Nolan returned with another memory. She sat in interview room 2, staring at a faded photograph of Richard Hale. I remembered something. Emma switched on the recorder. What is it? Never talked about killing people. Emma frowned. What did he talk about? Replacing them. Grace folded her hands together. He used to say. She closed her eyes, hearing the words again. Dead people create questions. Missing people create searches. But legally dead people create certainty. Emma didn't interrupt. Grace continued. He believed paperwork was stronger than violence. Ben wrote the sentence down. It explained almost everything. The river, the false identities, the staged evidence, the forged documents. The custodians didn't want bodies. They wanted certainty. Once the legal system declared someone dead, most people stopped asking questions. Daniel called from the digital lab. I found something in Rachel's email. Emma hurried in. A message had arrived that morning. Official county letterhead. Court notification. Mandatory appearance regarding Collins Trust proceedings. Friday, 10 o'clock. Emma immediately recognized the timing. Can you verify it? Daniel was already typing. 3 minutes later he looked up. It's fake. The website? Copied? The email domain? One letter different. Ben smiled grimly. They're trying to get her alone. Emma nodded. And somewhere they control. Sheriff Grady assembled every available detective. No one opens unexpected mail. No one answers unknown calls. No one changes assignments without my approval. And Emma appreciated the caution. But something still bothered her. Richard Hale had stayed ahead of them for months. He wouldn't rely on one fake email. He always had a backup. Late that afternoon, Daniel quietly approached Emma. I think I know who's leaking information. He handed her a printout. The retired deputy's credentials had accessed the case again. This time, Daniel had traced the physical workstation. Terminal 14. Emma recognized it immediately. A computer in the records division, not used by patrol, not used by detectives. Only civilian employees. She looked at the staff roster. One name appeared beside Terminal 14. Linda Carver, records clerk. 17 years with the department. No disciplinary history. Ben read over her shoulder. You think she's helping them? Emma shook her head. I don't know. I want to know why. Linda agreed to speak voluntarily. She appeared confused by the questions. Emma watched her carefully. Do you use Terminal 14 every day? Less. Has anyone ever asked to borrow your workstation? Linda hesitated. Sometimes. Ooh. Who? The maintenance supervisor? Emma frowned. Maintenance? He said he needed to update software? Did he have authorization? I assumed he did. How often? Linda thought carefully. Every few months. Emma felt her pulse quicken. Can you describe him? Linda frowned. Tall, gray beard, always polite. Ben slowly looked toward Emma. Richard Hale. He hadn't hacked the department. He had simply walked inside pretending to belong there. Daniel checked visitor logs. No maintenance contractor matched Linda's description. The signatures were false. The identification numbers belonged to retired employees. Richard Hale had spent years entering the sheriff's office through the front door. Not by force. By confidence. At 6 o'clock that evening, Emma finally drove home. The house was quiet. Dexter was waiting on the back of the couch. The kitten stretched lazily before trotting over to greet her. Emma picked him up. You've had a peaceful day. Dexter answered with a contented purr. For a few minutes, she sat in silence, absent-mindedly scratching behind his ears while reviewing Rachel's protection schedule. 2 deputies. Rotating shifts, hourly check-ins, everything looked solid. Then she noticed one small detail. Between 7:45 p.m. and 8:00 p.m., there was a scheduled shift change. 15 minutes. Emma immediately stood. No. She grabbed her phone. Ben answered on the second ring. What is it? The shift change. What about it? For 15 minutes. Rachel only has one deputy. Silence. Then Ben's voice changed. I'm calling them now. The call came back less than 30 seconds later. Ben didn't sound like himself. Emma? What happened? The deputy says Rachel isn't home. Emma was already running for her car. What do you mean she isn't home? Hay says she left 10 minutes before the shift change. With who? Another pause. He says another detective arrived to transport her. Emma's heart dropped. There wasn't another detective. 7 minutes later, Emma reached Rachel's house. Blue lights already filled the street. The front door stood open. There were no signs of a struggle. Rachel's purse remained on the kitchen counter. Her phone lay charging beside it. Only one thing was missing. Rachel. The deputy looked devastated. He showed me a badge. What badge? I thought he was with major crimes. Emma asked the question she already feared. What did he look like? The deputy swallowed hard. Gray hair, trimmed beard, and he closed his eyes. A silver eagle belt buckle. Emma stepped into the living room. Everything was undisturbed. No broken furniture, no blood. No screams heard by neighbors. Exactly as Richard Hale preferred. Rachel hadn't been abducted in chaos. She had been professionally removed. Emma looked at the family photographs still hanging on the wall. Margaret. Rachel. A life that had already been fractured once. Now it was happening again. Ben entered carrying something recovered from the driveway, a folded sheet of paper. He handed it to Emma. Typed across the front were just 6 words. As the third transition has begun. XF. Emma folded the note slowly, for the first time since the investigation started. The custodians weren't one step ahead. They had taken exactly what they came for. The sheriff's office didn't sleep. By sunrise, every available deputy, state trooper, and neighboring agency had Rachel Collins' photograph. Roadblocks appeared on the highways leading out of Blackridge. Air support searched the surrounding forests. Every abandoned building within 30 miles was checked. Nothing. It was as though Rachel had simply ceased to exist. Emma knew that feeling. That was exactly what Richard Hale wanted. Not panic. Certainty. If no one found Rachel quickly enough, the paperwork would eventually begin. A missing person. Then a presumed death. Then another carefully manufactured identity waiting in the wings. She refused to let that happen. Daniel hurried into briefing room carrying a portable hard drive. I recovered traffic cameras the custodians didn't erase. Emma looked up immediately. How? They focused on county systems. This footage belongs to the Department of Transportation. The video played. Rachel sat in the passenger seat of a dark SUV. She wasn't tied up. She wasn't struggling. She looked confused. The vehicle stopped briefly at a railroad crossing. For 3 seconds, the driver's profile became visible. Richard Victor Hale. Clearer than any photograph they had collected. Ben paused the frame. He wanted us to see him. Emma nodded. He knows we're following. The SUV disappeared east instead of west. Daniel enlarged the route map. That's strange. What? They drove toward the old State Records campus. Emma frowned. I thought that closed years ago. It did. The campus had once stored birth certificates, land deeds, probate files, and court archives before everything was digitized. Most of the buildings had been abandoned. Emma slowly looked at Ben. If your entire organization depends on documents. Ben finished the thought. This would be the perfect place. Sis. Sheriff Grady authorized an immediate response. No lights. No sirens. If Rachel's inside. We don't give Hale a warning. 3 unmarked vehicles rolled toward the abandoned complex. Rain clouds gathered overhead once again. The sprawling campus appeared deserted, broken windows, weeds pushing through cracked pavement. A faded government seal still hung above the main entrance. Emma stepped out quietly. Nothing moved, no voices, no vehicles. Just silence. Too much silence. Daniel remained inside the mobile command vehicle. I'm picking up a weak wireless signal. Emma touched her earpiece. From where? Basement level. Ben checked the old building plans. There wasn't supposed to be a basement. There is, Daniel replied. It just isn't on the public blueprints. Ew. The entrance was hidden behind rows of rusted shelving inside an old records warehouse. A heavy steel door stood slightly open. Fresh footprints crossed the dusty floor. Emma drew her weapon. Ben followed close behind. The staircase descended farther than either expected. Concrete walls, emergency lighting, modern security cameras. Someone had invested serious money underground. At the bottom, a steel sign hung beside another door. Only one word appeared: ARCHIV. Inside, the rooms looked nothing like an abandoned government building. Computers, scanning stations, industrial printers, document presses, shelves stretching into the distance, thousands of files, birth certificates, driver's licenses, property deeds, school transcripts, military records. Every document needed to construct an entire life. Ben whispered, "My God." Emma understood immediately. This wasn't merely where identities were stored. This was where they were manufactured. One room contained nothing but framed family photographs. Hundreds of them, each carefully labeled. Emma stopped. There was the Collins family, the Brooks family, families she'd never heard of. Each wall represented decades of observation. Children growing into adults, graduations, weddings, funerals. The custodians hadn't watched people for weeks. They had watched them for generations. Daniel's voice crackled through the radio. "I found another camera." "What does it show?" A live video feed appeared on Emma's phone. Rachel, she was sitting alone in a brightly lit room. No restraints, no visible injuries. A glass of water rested beside her. She looked frightened, but alive. Emma felt the first genuine relief she'd experienced in 2 days. "Can you locate the room?" Daniel answered almost immediately. "North corridor, second level." Emma and Ben moved quickly. Every hallway looked identical. Plain gray walls, numbered doors, no decorations, no windows. Room 214, empty. Room 216, empty. Then, room 218. Emma pushed the door open. Rachel wasn't there. Only a neatly arranged table, a digital camera, fingerprint scanner, passport photographs, stacks of blank identification cards. Ben searched the room. They moved her. Emma noticed an envelope resting in the center of the table. Her name was written across the front, Emma Hayes. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single handwritten note. "Ours, you're asking the wrong question. Aldrin, nothing else. No signature. No threat. Just 6 words." Emma turned the paper over. Blank. Ben looked around the room. "He knew we'd come." "No." Emma replied quietly. "He expected us." A soft sound echoed somewhere behind them. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Neither detective spoke. Emma turned toward the hallway. A lone man stood at the opposite end. Gray hair, dark coat, Silver Eagle belt buckle. Richard Victor Hale. For the first time, he wasn't hiding behind surveillance cameras. He wasn't disappearing into the shadows. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, studying Emma with calm curiosity. Neither raised a weapon, neither spoke. Several long seconds passed. Then Hale gave the slightest nod. Not mocking. Not friendly. Almost respectful. He finally broke the silence. "You've done better than anyone before you." His voice was calm, measured, almost gentle. Emma kept her weapon trained on him. "Where's Rachel?" Hale's expression never changed. "Safe." "I don't believe you. You don't have to." Emma took one careful step forward. "It's over." Hale looked almost saddened. "No, detective." He glanced briefly toward the endless rows of archived identities behind him. "You still think this investigation is about a murder?" Emma frowned. "It isn't." Hale looked directly into her eyes. "It hasn't been about murder from the very beginning." Before Emma could respond, the lights throughout the underground archive went out. Complete darkness swallowed the corridor. Then emergency alarms began to sound. And somewhere inside the maze beneath the old records building, Richard Victor Hale disappeared once again. The emergency lights flickered to life, deep red. The underground corridors suddenly looked unfamiliar. The alarms echoed through the archive, making it impossible to judge distance. Emma kept her weapon raised. Hale? No answer. Only footsteps somewhere in the darkness. Running, Ben pointed toward an intersecting hallway. That way. They sprinted. Every corner looked identical. Every numbered door blended into the next. Someone had designed the archive to confuse anyone unfamiliar with it. Daniel's voice crackled through Emma's radio. The cameras just went offline, everyone. We're. All except one. We're. The processing room. Emma and Ben followed Daniel's directions. At the end of the corridor, they reached a reinforced steel door. Locked. Ben didn't hesitate. He rammed it with his shoulder. Nothing again. The frame groaned. A third impact finally forced it open. Inside, Rachel sat in a chair. She wasn't restrained. A camera stood on a tripod in front of her. Bright studio lights illuminated a plain gray backdrop. A fingerprint scanner rested beside a laptop. Stacks of official-looking documents covered a nearby table. Rachel looked up. Emma. Emma crossed the room in seconds. Are you hurt? Rachel shook her head. No, Po. They never touched me. Ben quickly searched the room. No one else. Emma looked at the paperwork. Application forms. Medical records. Employment history. A driver's license already printed. Not Rachel Collins. Another name entirely. Someone had already built the next version of her life. Rachel took a slow breath. They kept asking me questions. What kind? My favorite teacher. My handwriting. My childhood. They weren't interrogating me. Emma looked at the documents. They were teaching someone else how to become you. Rachel nodded slowly. I realized that too late. Daniel interrupted over the radio. I found another server. What does it contain? I don't know yet. A pause. Then his voice changed. Emma? You need to see this? They followed the signal into another section of the underground complex. Unlike the document rooms, this area looked much older. Concrete walls, steel cabinets, dust everywhere. The computers were modern. Everything else belonged to another era. Daniel had already accessed one of the servers remotely. A single database appeared on the screen. Lenny G. Rice T. Ben frowned. What is that? Daniel opened the first file. It wasn't financial. It wasn't criminal. It was genealogical. Entire family trees. Births, deaths, marriages, adoptions. Notes stretching back nearly a century. Emma scrolled farther. The Collins family occupied hundreds of pages. So did the Brooks family. Then another. And another. Dozens of influential families from across the state. Each marked with handwritten observations. Potential heir. No children. Financial instability. Subject vulnerable. Ben stared at the monitor. They weren't choosing victims randomly. Emma nodded. They were selecting people who controlled inheritances. One section of the registry contained internal correspondence. Emma opened the newest entry. Richard Hale had written it only 2 weeks earlier. Subject Margaret Collins failed to transition. Secondary plan initiated through Rachel Collins. Assist beneath it. A response. Unsigned. Only one line. Proceed. The bloodline must remain under approved stewardship. Emma read it twice. Approved stewardship. Daniel looked at another message. It appears constantly. Ben folded his arms. So what exactly are they protecting? Emma answered quietly. Control. Not money. The right to decide who eventually owns it. Rachel sat silently while Emma continued searching. Then she asked a question no one had considered. If Hale isn't giving the orders, everyone looked at one another. Daniel searched internal messages. Every instruction came from the same account. Stephen, no first name, no initials, no signature, just steward. Emma finally found Richard Hale's personnel profile inside the custodian database. Unlike the others, his contained a biography, former probate investigator, recruited 7 years earlier, regional custodian director, reports to, steward. Emma stopped reading. Hale isn't the leader. Ben looked surprised. He's middle management. Daniel nodded slowly. And judging by these records, there are regional directors in at least 6 other states. Silence settled over the room. Everything Emma believed she understood suddenly became much larger. Blackridge wasn't the center. It was one branch. Sheriff Grady's voice came over the tactical channel. We've secured the upper floors. No sign of Hale. Emma wasn't surprised. Richard Hale always planned his exits first. She looked once more around the processing room. Everything had been abandoned in minutes. Not rushed, ordered. As if everyone already knew exactly where to go. Before leaving, Emma checked one final filing cabinet, nearly empty. Only one folder remained. No family name, no address, just a single label. Inside was one brittle photograph, black and white. Taken sometime in the early 1960s. 5 men stood outside a courthouse. One of them had been circled in blue ink. On the back, someone had written a first, steward. Emma expected another note. Instead, she found a newspaper clipping folded behind the photograph. Vest local attorney dies at age 82. The obituary had been published 3 weeks earlier. Emma frowned. That can't be right. Ben looked over her shoulder. What? The founders started this organization decades ago. She handed him the obituary. The man who died wasn't old enough. Daniel quickly ran the photograph through facial comparison software. The result appeared seconds later. 96% match. The elderly attorney, who supposedly died 3 weeks ago, was the young man standing in the 60-year-old photograph. Emma stared at the screen. That's impossible. Daniel slowly shook his head. No. He zoomed in on the obituary. There isn't any death certificate attached. No burial notice. No funeral announcement. Ben's expression hardened. So he didn't die. Emma looked back at the photograph. I don't think so either. She carefully folded the clipping and slipped it into an evidence bag. For nearly 30 years, Richard Hale had seemed untouchable. Now Emma understood why. He hadn't built the custodians. He had inherited them, and somewhere beyond the walls of the archive, the person known only as the steward, the architect of everything, might still be alive. The drive back from the archive was silent. Rachel rode in the rear seat with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She hadn't spoken much. Every few minutes she looked out the window as though expecting someone to still be following them. Emma understood. That feeling didn't disappear overnight. Sometimes it stayed for years. Back at headquarters, the conference room looked different. The investigation board that had once held a single photograph of Margaret Collins now covered 3 walls. Dozens of names, maps, financial records, family trees, photographs collected over generations. Emma stood in front of it for a long time. We've been looking at pieces. Ben nodded. So what's the whole picture? Emma picked up a marker. At the center of the board she wrote 2 words. Estquantiral ofinhish there. She drew lines outward. Identity replacement. Fraudulent deaths. Forged probate records. Fake beneficiaries. Manufactured heirs. It was never about stealing one estate. She stepped back. It was about deciding who inherited hundreds of them. Daniel entered carrying a thick binder. I finally reconstructed the custodian correspondence. Emma looked up. Anything useful? Very. He opened to the earliest recovered document. The date surprised everyone. 1964. The letter described a bitter inheritance dispute involving several influential families. The final paragraph read, "Disorder follows uncertainty. Estates must never be left to chance again." Ben frowned. That's how this started. Daniel nodded. It looks that way. The first steward believed families couldn't be trusted to preserve wealth. Emma quietly added another note to the board. Nas control disguised as protection. Grace Nolan read several pages in silence. Finally, she looked up. They really believed this. Emma nodded. They convinced themselves they were guardians, not criminals. Grace sighed. That's exactly how Hale talked. He always said chaos was the real enemy. Late that afternoon, Richard Hale finally made contact, not by phone, not by letter. He walked into a small church on the edge of Blackridge. The caretaker recognized him from the statewide bulletin and immediately called police. Emma and Ben arrived within minutes. The sanctuary was empty. Only Hale remained. He sat alone in the front pew, hands folded, looking toward the stained glass windows. He didn't move when Emma entered. I wondered how long it would take. Emma kept her weapon lowered. You could have run. I've been running for 27 years. Ben quietly moved toward the side aisle. Hale didn't even glance at him. You've lost. Emma's voice echoed through the empty church. Hale smiled faintly. Have I? The archive is gone. The registry is ours. Rachel is alive. You failed. For the first time, Richard Hale looked tired. I failed one assignment. Not the mission. Emma stepped closer. What mission? Hale looked toward the altar. Most people believe wealth passes from one generation to the next. It doesn't. It passes to whoever understands paperwork. He looked back at Emma. We simply removed chance. You removed people. Emma replied. We preserved stability. You murdered Thomas Brooks. Hale didn't answer. You murdered Sarah Brooks. Silence. You tried to erase Margaret Collins. Still nothing. Finally, Hale spoke. I regret every death. But the work had to continue. Emma shook her head. No. It only had to continue because people like you refused to stop. Outside, detectives quietly surrounded the church. Sheriff Grady waited for Emma's signal. She wasn't ready yet. There was one question left. Hale. He looked at her. Who is the steward? A long silence followed. Finally, Hale smiled. You've already met him. Emma's expression didn't change. Who? He attended Thomas Brooks' funeral. He attended Sarah Brooks' funeral. He even attended Margaret Collins' funeral. Ben frowned. We interviewed hundreds of people. You interviewed him? Hale said calmly. You simply never questioned him. Daniel's phone rang inside the mobile command vehicle. Seconds later, he ran toward the church. Emma? She turned. I found something. He held up an old photograph recovered from the founder file. I enhanced the people standing behind the founder. Emma took it. One face immediately stood out. She knew it. Not because it had appeared in the investigation. Because she'd seen it almost every day. Daniel spoke quietly. The founder trained a law student. That student became a prosecutor, then a judge. He retired 6 years ago. Emma slowly looked back at Hale. The steward. Hale said nothing. Daniel finished the sentence. Judge Arthur Whitmore. The name landed heavily. Arthur Whitmore. The retired appellate judge who had spent decades reviewing probate appeals. The respected civic leader. The man who regularly donated to schools, churches, and historical societies. The man Emma herself had shaken hands with during a courthouse ceremony the previous year. Ben whispered, No. Emma immediately reached for her radio. Dispatch. Locate Arthur Whitmore immediately. The dispatcher answered almost instantly. Detective. She hesitated. We already tried. Emma's heart sank. What do you mean? Judge Whitmore checked out of Blackridge Memorial Hospital 40 minutes ago. Hospital? He was admitted under hospice care. Emma looked at Hale. A faint smile crossed his face. He always preferred perfect timing. Emma understood immediately. Whitmore hadn't been dying. He had been hiding. By the time deputies reached the hospital, The room was empty. The bed had been stripped. The patient records had vanished. Only one item remained on the bedside table. A handwritten note. It contained just one sentence. As stewards are chosen, they are never caught ACUS. The investigation continued for another 6 weeks. For the first time since Margaret Collins had walked into her own funeral uke, the detectives were no longer chasing rumors. They were following evidence. Thousands of documents recovered from the archive were reconstructed. Some had survived on remote backup servers. Others had been hidden inside forgotten county databases. Daniel and a team of state investigators worked almost around the clock. Every recovered record uncovered another lie, another stolen identity, another manipulated inheritance, another family whose history had quietly been rewritten. The custodians had spent decades believing paperwork could bury the truth. Instead, their paperwork became the evidence that destroyed them. Richard Victor Hale never tried to escape again. He requested an attorney. He answered almost no questions. But he didn't deny who he was. When confronted with the recovered archive files, he simply nodded. "I expected Emma Hayes to find them." That statement appeared in every newspaper covering the investigation. Emma disliked the attention. She knew the case had never been solved by one detective. It had been solved by dozens of ordinary people who finally chose to tell the truth. Grace Nolan, Valerie Owens, Frank Delaney, Daniel, Ben, Margaret, Rachel, even frightened witnesses who had carried guilt for years. Every one of them had contributed a piece. Only together had the picture become clear. The state attorney general announced a special task force. More than 300 questionable probate cases were reopened. Dozens of fraudulent inheritances were frozen. Banks began reviewing transactions dating back decades. Families once told there was no evidence finally received answers. Not every wrong could be corrected. Some rightful heirs had already passed away. Some stolen property could never be recovered. But history itself had begun to heal. Margaret Collins stood once again inside Blackridge High School. The faculty applauded when she entered. Not because she had survived. Because she had returned. The office that had once been packed into boxes looked exactly as she'd left it. She smiled through tears. "I never thought I'd unlock this door again." Emma quietly replied, "Neither did the people who tried to take it from you." Rachel's recovery took longer. She struggled with ordinary things, answering unfamiliar phone numbers, walking through parking lots alone, trusting strangers. One afternoon she thanked Emma. "You didn't just save my life." Emma shook her head. "Your sister never stopped fighting for you." Rachel smiled. "Neither did you." Grace Nolan made another choice. She voluntarily surrendered the false identity she'd lived under for 21 years. The legal process wasn't easy. There were hearings, paperwork, questions without simple answers. But one morning she walked out of the courthouse carrying a driver's license with her real name, Grace Nolan. She looked at it for several seconds before quietly saying, "I'd forgotten what it felt like to exist." Richard Hale eventually agreed to one final interview. Only Emma attended. He looked older than he had just weeks before. Smaller somehow. Emma placed a photograph of the archive on the table. It wasn't enough. Hale looked at the picture. "No. You controlled lives for decades. You still lost." He considered her words carefully, then gave the smallest of nods. "I made one mistake." Emma waited. "I underestimated curiosity." She almost smiled. "No. You underestimated ordinary people." Hale looked down. For the first time, he had no answer. The search for Arthur Whitmore continued. Federal investigators traced shell companies across multiple states. Several safe houses were identified. Others had already been abandoned. The current steward had disappeared. Whether he was truly alive, whether someone else had already taken his place, No one could say. Emma eventually removed his photograph from the investigation board. Not because she believed he was gone, because obsession had solved nothing. Evidence had. If he surfaced again, she would be ready. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Ben complained about paperwork. Daniel buried himself in digital forensics. Sheriff Grady finally took the vacation everyone knew he would cancel. Blackridge settled back into its familiar rhythm. One rainy evening, Emma arrived home carrying a small cardboard box. Dexter immediately investigated it. Inside were new toys, a blanket, a food bowl, and a small brass tag. Emma picked up the collar. She knelt beside the now much larger ginger cat. "I suppose it's official." Dexter bumped his head gently against her hand. Emma fastened the collar around his neck. The tag read simply "De Sixta R. Shuoamis." He purred loudly, completely satisfied with the arrangement. Emma laughed softly. "I was hoping you'd approve." Several days later, she received one final package. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. The Collins family, taken nearly 30 years earlier. Nothing unusual at first glance, until Emma turned it over. Someone had written a short sentence in careful handwriting. "If truth survives longer than secrecy." There was no signature, no fingerprints, no hidden message. Emma pinned the photograph above her desk, not as a warning, as a reminder. The custodians had believed that documents could replace truth. They had believed identities could be manufactured. They had believed ordinary people would eventually stop asking questions. They had been wrong. Emma switched off the light in her office. Dexter followed her toward the front door, his collar softly jingling with every step. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. Somewhere, another mystery was already waiting. But tonight, Pat. For the first time in a very long while, Emma Hayes went home knowing that Margaret Collins, Rachel Collins, and countless other families had been given something the custodians could never manufacture: their own lives back. If you enjoyed this investigation, please like the video, subscribe to Midnight Casefiles, and share it with someone who loves intelligent mystery stories. Your support helps bring more original investigations to the channel, and we'll see you in the next case. The front door closed behind Emma. The house became quiet. And in that quiet, a new chapter of her life had already begun.